Chapter 420. Titles like Yuhuan Tianzuan and Divine Lord of Dawn were just nicknames. Since the strength of the 5 divine generals was equivalent to the Yuanying stage, then the 10 heavenly lords were equivalent to the soul formation stage. The difference between the soul formation stage and the Yuanying stage seemed to be only one stage. But this difference could be said to be the difference between heaven and earth, the difference between clouds and mud. Using the orthodox cultivation heritage of the heavenly jade world as an example, after a cultivator had refined and accumulated their true yuan to a certain extent, they could refine this true yuan to a perfect state and form a golden core. After forming a golden core, the golden core became the foundation of a cultivator's cultivation, and at the same time, it was a hotbed for yuanying. It was like a seed that was scattered in the soil. As long as it was carefully cared for, it would eventually blossom and bear fruit. The flower that blossomed from the golden core, this was the so-called yuanying. Yuanying was formed from the transformation of the golden core. During the entire transformation process, the cultivator's 3 spiritual and 7 physical souls would gradually transfer from the heart to the yuanying. As long as the yuanying was not extinguished, the soul would not dissipate. It was also because of this that even if a cultivator's physical body was destroyed during the yuanying stage, they could still use the yuanying to possess another body and obtain a new life. Qi refinement, foundation establishment, golden core, yuanying, soul formation, void. If the Qi refinement stage was the starting point for one to enter the immortal sect, then the foundation establishment and golden core stages were actually just a process of continuous consolidation. Cultivation was also mainly about refining the spiritual energy of heaven and earth and refining one's own true yuan. In fact, even though the golden core stage was called a heavenly man, they had not truly entered the next level of qualitative change. Only after a cultivator had formed yuanying and merged their soul with the yuanying would they truly begin to undergo a second qualitative change. Therefore, the entire process from Qi refinement to golden core was also called transforming essence into Qi. There were no shortcuts on the path of cultivation. Could be said that one had to take one step at a time. This aspect had not been mentioned before because those below the semi-god realm were nothing but ants. Divine generals seemed high and mighty, but in Qinshi's eyes, there wasn't much difference between divine generals and celestials. After all, transforming energy into Qi was only the first stage. Only when a cultivator broke through to the yuanying stage and began to explore the threshold of the soul formation stage, would they officially step into the second stage, which was refining Qi into spirit. Everything was easy to learn but difficult to master. Cultivation was no exception. It took Qinshi 500 years to progress from the Qi refinement stage to the soul formation stage. Compared to those old freaks who spent thousands of years to reach the soul formation stage, this cultivation speed was already very terrifying. But even with Qinshi's outstanding talent for cultivation, after reaching the divine transformation stage, it would be extremely difficult to make further breakthroughs. Because at this level, refining essence into Qi was no longer the main point. Refining Qi into spirit was the main point. The so-called divinity transformation was to fuse yuanying with the divine soul, allowing it to undergo a qualitative change and form primordial spirit. Golden core yuanying primordial spirit. This was a transformation that every cultivator had to go through. Qinshi's cultivation had already reached the peak of the soul formation stage, only one step away from the insightful emptiness stage. So what he really had to face now was understanding the true meaning of the word void, understanding the first law of heaven and earth, and undergoing another qualitative change. This was something at the next level. Qinshi had yet to understand it, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was naturally far from it. Let's talk about the Dragon Head Peak first. After Yuhuan Tianzuan charged at Qinshi, the two immediately engaged in an all-out battle. The intensity of a battle at this level was completely beyond everyone's imagination. There was no concept of planets in the great world. After leaving the floating island, there was only the endless void left. Therefore, after Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spells closed the protective array, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately lured Qinshi into the depths of the void to prevent the battle from reaching the Imperial Zenith Hall. Without the restriction of the venue, the battle instantly became more intense. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spells and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen led a group of divine generals and celestial lords to watch the battle from afar. This battle shocked the entire great world. Almost everyone was watching this battle between heavenly venerables. The glazed glass lamp was blazing with red flames, and the divine general's Dharma idol sword shadows were endless. Astral winds blew and divine light fluttered. The void trembled and everyone looked down. If the floating island's protective array formation had not been personally set up by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, it would have been destroyed by the shockwaves from their battle. And as Yuhuan Tianzuan gradually revealed his full strength, Qin Shi also fell into a disadvantage. This was the first time Qin Shi was so passive in a battle since returning to Earth. On one hand, it was because he had not recovered to his peak state. On the other hand, it was entirely because of the jade-glazed glass lamp in Yuhuan Tianzuan's hand. In any case, Yuhuan Tianzuan was the leader of the 10 heavenly venerables. At the same time, he also had the help of a supreme treasure like the jade-glazed glass lamp. Qin Shi was alone and did not even have a weapon to back him up. Thus he did not dare to face him head-on. Thus Qin Shi could only retreat as he fought. He tried to find Yuhuan Tianzuan's weakness in the battle and defeat him in one fell swoop. After a fierce battle, Qin Shi had a rough idea of Yuhuan Tianzuan's strength. Although this old man's cultivation was high, it was obvious that he was slightly inferior. He was about the mid-stage soul formation. It was unknown whether it was because the great world was too peaceful, but Yuhuan Tianzuan's combat experience was clearly inferior to Qin Shi's because he had not experienced blood and fire. Thus, Qin Shi decided to show weakness to his enemy and silently look for an opportunity. If he was strong, he would be strong. If he was tyrannical, he would be tyrannical. When Yuhuan Tianzuan saw that Qin Shi kept retreating, he mistakenly thought that Qin Shi was afraid of fighting. Thus, he did not think much and immediately stepped up his attack, trying to create pressure for Qin Shi. But what Yuhuan Tianzuan did not expect was, just as he threw out the glazed glass lamp again, Qin Shi's eyes suddenly lit up. Found it? All the threats came from the jade-glazed glass lamp. If Yuhuan Tianzuan had kept the glazed glass lamp by his side and personally went forward to fight with Qin Shi might have some scruples. But now Yuhuan Tianzuan threw out the glazed glass lamp, trying to kill him with a supreme treasure. Such a reckless approach was exactly what Qin Shi wanted to see happen. Thus, Qin Shi immediately held his breath and focused, turning a blind eye to the glazed glass lamp in front of him. Instead, he placed all his attention on Yuhuan Tianzuan. Just as the jade-glazed glass lamp was about to hit, Qin Shi drew his sword. Changing sword style, Kuan to softness, even movement is hard. One had to know that the profound valley sword art was not a cultivation technique that Qin Shi created himself. It was the culmination of a senior expert's lifetime of hard work, and then through the continuous refinement of the sect masters of the Heavenly Evolution Divine Sect, it was a classic that had been handed down for generations. The profound valley sword art was exquisite beyond compare. The sword started from Taiji and divided into yin and yang. The 4 trigrams of yang were Qian Dui Li Zhen. The 4 trigrams of yin were Sun Kan Zhen Kuan. The 3 trigrams of yang went against the sword, and the 3 trigrams of yin went with the sword. When released, it covered heaven and earth and hid yin and yang unfathomable. The 6 trigrams of qi shook heaven and earth, and the 4 trigrams of qi went against the flow. The 4 trigrams of the sun and moon, and the stars changed when moved. Qin Shi had pretended to be weak in order to use this killer move. Thus, the moment he drew his sword, the surging true essence immediately affected the qi, and an intense killing intent instantly filled the endless void where the two of them were. Yuhuan Tianzuan sensed that something was wrong and hurriedly wanted to withdraw the glazed glass lamp. But at this moment, Qin Shi had already swung the sword in his hand. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com. Wonderful book mobile version website, .com. Chapter 421. Kuan was the softest, and when it moved, it was the strongest. The moment this sword was swung out, an aurora appeared in the sky of the great world for the first time. Looking at it from afar, it was so beautiful and dazzling, full of colors. Against the endless void, the sword shadows that filled the sky were like colorful ribbons. Ying gently floated toward Yuhuan Tianzuan along with the breeze. Then the sword shadows collided with the burning jade world glazed cup. But what was surprising was that the sword shadows were like ripples of water. The moment they touched the jade world glazed cup, they immediately split and floated to the sides, as if they were actively making way for the cup. The jade world glazed cup smashed toward Qin Shi like a hot knife through butter. Meanwhile, the sword shadows circled around the lamp and gracefully drifted toward heavenly venerable Yuhuan. And this was the opportunity that Qin Shi had been waiting for a long time. At the cost of taking a hit from the glazed cup in exchange for a chance to hit Yuhuan Tianzuan with a sword. A sword for a cup. It seemed like there was no difference, but in fact Qin Shi had profited. As the saying went, those who were barefoot were not afraid of those who were wearing shoes. He was an old bachelor. If it was purely a competition of Dharma treasures, he would definitely be at a disadvantage. Therefore, the strategy of harming the enemy while harming himself was clearly the best strategy. Therefore, by the time Yuhuan Tianzuan realized something was wrong, it was already too late for him to take back the glazed cup. As a result, Yuhuan Tianzuan could only watch as the sword shadows, which were like huge waves on the sea, came crashing toward him. Boom! With a loud boom, a magnificent scene similar to that of a planet exploding appeared before everyone's eyes. Along with the blazing light produced by the explosion, billions of needle-like rays of light shot into everyone's eyes. These rays of light still contained the true essence of the two celestial venerables, so when they entered their eyes, it gave people a heart-wrenching pain. Among them, those with lower cultivation levels were pierced by the qi on the spot, causing blood to seep out of their eye sockets. Except for the two Empyreans, Miao Fa and Xian Zhen, almost everyone was affected by the aftermath of the battle. The surging True Yuan wreaked havoc in the boundless void, causing the 120,000 floating islands to tremble. The heavens of the great world, it was going to collapse. Fortunately, every floating island had a protective formation left behind by the divine ancestor, so no matter how intense the battle was, it had very little effect on the residents of the islands. When the strong light began to weaken, everyone turned their heads, wanting to know the result of this battle as soon as possible. As everyone looked over, they could see that Heavenly Venerable Yuhuan was still facing off against the unknown invader in the distant void. It was as if nothing had happened. It was as if the victor had not been decided yet. Seeing this, everyone couldn't help but sigh. This was indeed a battle between Heavenly Venerables. From the looks of it, it would be impossible to determine the victor in a short period of time. However, just as everyone was looking forward to a more exciting battle scene, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly spat out a mouthful of blood essence. Then he pointed at Qin in horror and sighed. "Where did you come from? It's impossible for an expert like you to appear in the lower realm." Impossible. After this battle, Yuhuan Tianzuan finally saw Qin's true ability. If he didn't have a defensive magic treasure on him, this sword might have left a mark on his body. Even so, this sword still hurt Yuhuan Tianzuan so much so that his breathing was obviously a little irregular, and the blood in his chest was constantly surging. "Can we sit down and talk now?" Qin didn't directly answer Yuhuan Tianzuan's question. After he withdrew the divine general celestial body in his hand, he made an inviting gesture to Yuhuan Tianzuan, giving Yuhuan Tianzuan enough face. After all, unless it was absolutely necessary, Qin really didn't want to use force to solve the problem. However, what Qin didn't expect was that, after hearing his words, Yuhuan Tianzuan's eyes suddenly flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. Then he suddenly sent a voice transmission to the two heavenly venerables, Miaofa and Xuanzhen. "This thief is tricky. Please lend me a hand and take him down." Hearing this, heavenly venerables Miaofa and Xuanzhen couldn't help but look at each other. They seemed to have some concerns in their hearts. It was not that they didn't want to help, but because of their status, they felt that it was a little difficult. After all, the three of them were the high and mighty heavenly venerables of the 10 directions. Now, they actually wanted to join forces to attack one person. What would the onlookers think? As heavenly venerables, did they have any shame? Seeing that the two of them were hesitating, Yuhuan Tianzuan immediately added, "This person's origin is unknown. You have seen the moves that he used just now. His cultivation method seems to be more exquisite than the great clear orthodoxy left behind by the divine ancestor. Therefore, I suspect that he didn't come from the lower realm at all, but from somewhere else. This person has a big secret on him. If he can fall into our hands, it will be a great thing. I ask the two of you to help me capture him. Don't let him escape." At this point, if heavenly venerables Miaofa and Xuanzhen still didn't express their opinions, they wouldn't be giving Yuhuan Tianzuan any face. Moreover, after watching the battle just now, the two of them had developed a great interest in the Dark Valley sword technique that Qin used. Therefore, after looking at each other, they directly rushed toward Qin. Anyway, the 10 directions heavens had already lost all their face. What was the point of saying so much nonsense? As long as they captured this person, they could find a random reason to explain it to the onlookers. From the beginning to the end, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't want to negotiate with Qin. On one hand, it was because of Wuxia's death. On the other hand, it was completely because an ordinary man was innocent, but treasuring a jade ring was a crime. Qin contended empty-handed against Empyrean Yuhuan, who wielded a supreme treasure. Even so, he still held the upper hand. Therefore, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't need to think with his but to know. Qin's cultivation method was definitely stronger than the great clear orthodoxy. How could he not be tempted? Everyone wanted to improve, and Yuhuan Tianzuan was no exception. Therefore, a scene that made everyone's jaws drop happened. three heavenly venerables actually attacked that unknown intruder at the same time? Was this a group attack because they couldn't win in a one-on-one fight? Chen Shi's condition wasn't very good to begin with. In the battle just now, although he was lucky enough to win against Yuhuan Tianzuan, he had also used up most of his energy. Now that he saw the three heavenly venerables charging at him at the same time, Chen Shi's first thought was to run. However, as soon as this thought appeared, it was immediately thrown out of his mind. He couldn't run. Ying was still waiting for him to save her. The soul mirror was in the square outside the Imperial Hall, so, even if he died today, he had to smash that broken mirror first. Alright, the updates were not good enough. Even breathing was wrong. Big bosses, I was wrong. You read a lot, so of course you know the traditional cultivation realms, but some readers don't know. As a salted fish, I really don't dare to promise how much I will update every day. I also don't want to lie to you and paint a big picture for you. In short, under the situation of maintaining daily updates, I'll update as much as I can. Look, I updated early today so I can save 300 more words there at night. Chapter 422. Deep in the Void. The three heavenly lords no longer cared about their identities and attacked Chen Shi with all their might. What was originally a one-on-one duel had now become a three-on-one brawl. It had been a long time since such a grand event had happened in the great world. Everyone hid on their own floating islands and watched as the four heavenly venerables engaged in a chaotic battle. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's Cultivation were slightly lower than Yuhuan Tianzuan's. They were about the early stage of the Soul Formation realm. Using the Soul Formation realm as an example, each realm could be roughly divided into the early stage, the middle stage, the late stage, and the peak stage, which was only half a step away from the next realm. Although Chen Shi had already stepped into the peak of the Soul Formation realm, he had never recovered to his peak state. Moreover, he did not have any magic treasures on him. Therefore, when he was surrounded by two early-stage soul formation and one mid-stage soul formation, he suddenly felt a little powerless. He could barely deal with the attacks of the three of them, let alone counterattack. Although Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's Cultivation were slightly lower, their magic treasures were also extraordinary. The Jade Huan Glazed Lamp was already powerful enough. However, if Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell's 8-View Palace Lantern and Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen's Coffin Lamp were added, these three magic treasures that looked like lanterns combined to form a top-notch treasure that could shake the entire heaven capital. The three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. Among them, the Jade Huan Glazed Lamp was heaven, the 8-View Palace Lantern was earth, and the Coffin Lamp was man. Similar to the Jade Huan Glazed Lamp, there was a flame in the 8-View Palace Lantern called the Sky Burning Purple Flame. There was also a flame in the Coffin Lamp called the Netherworld Ghost Flame. If the Jade Huan Glazed Lamp's Myriad Spirit Anciently was added, then the three most powerful flames in the world were all here. Chen Shi did not recognize these three magic treasures, so naturally he had never heard of the names of these three flames. However, his intuition told him that these three flames must not be touched. Once touched, the three flames would be like maggots in his bones. With his true essence as fuel, they would burn him to ashes. The three of them held the flames in their hands and pressed on. Chen Shi defended himself with his sword and retreated as he fought. Every time the two sides clashed, it was like fireworks on New Year's Eve, constantly blooming colorful lights in the void. Every time they clashed, the energy waves produced by their true yuan would constantly crash into the defensive formation of the 120,000 floating islands. For a moment, divine light filled the sky, shaking the void. What a magnificent scene! However, it was also in this seemingly gorgeous scene that a murderous aura was lurking. The slightest bit of carelessness would cause Chen Shi to meet a tragic end. Chen Shi had no chance of winning. However, he did not run away. Instead, he used all of his strength to fight against the three celestial venerables at the same time. He didn't want to defeat the three of them. Instead, he wanted to use the floating dawn mirror. Since it was for Ying, it was also for Nian. Thus, without the three celestial venerables noticing, Chen Shi gradually pulled the battlefield to the vicinity of Dragon Head Peak. They were so close that the onlookers on the island could even clearly see the different expressions on their faces. The battle lasted for a long time. Chen Shi also persisted for a long time. When the three celestial venerables once again released the heaven, earth, and man lanterns at the same time, Chen Shi's true essence was obviously insufficient. This caused his sword to be slower by a beat, allowing the three heaven, earth, and man lanterns to successfully reach him. In an instant, true essence surged and flames burst forth. The three heaven, earth, and man lanterns hit Chen Shi's chest at the same time, causing him to spit out a mouthful of blood. Then, like a meteor falling to earth, his entire body was on fire as he fiercely smashed into the square of Dragon Head Peak from the sky. Seeing this, the heavenly generals and star venerables on the square instantly scattered like frightened beasts. What kind of joke was this? These were the 3 legendary heaven-burning divine fires. Just a little bit of it would probably cripple one's entire life. Thus, after Qinshi's entire body was on fire and he heavily smashed into the ground like a meteor, he was the only one left in this huge square in an instant. If not for the protection of the array on the ground, he would probably have smashed a meteor crater on the spot. This person has a shocking cultivation, but unfortunately he fell here today. Although he's our enemy, this old man can't help but feel pity for him. What a pity, what a pity! After retrieving the 8 scenic palace lanterns, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell turned to look at the flames below. Seeing Qinshi's aura gradually weakening, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell couldn't help but sigh. Today this person fought 1 against 3. Even if he unfortunately fell, it could be considered a glorious death. Whether friend or foe, just based on this strength alone, this person was enough to win the respect he deserved. While Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell felt sorry for Qinshi, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't seem to feel the same way. Because he had fought Qinshi the most, Yuhuan Tianzuan didn't relax in the slightest even after Qinshi had been hit by the 3 lanterns. Instead, he felt that this matter was rather strange. It wasn't that he was very clear about Qinshi's strength. It was just a simple intuition. If it weren't for his pride, Yuhuan Tianzuan probably wouldn't have been able to resist the urge to deliver a few more blows. The 3 heavenly venerates flew in the air, each pondering something as they looked at the flames. However, at this moment, Qinshi made his move. Originally on the verge of death, he suddenly erupted with an earth-shattering aura and crawled up from the ground. Before the 3 heavenly venerates could react, Qinshi charged directly toward the soul mirror floating in the middle of the square. Oh no! We've been tricked. His target is the soul mirror. It was only now that Yuhuan Tianzuan truly understood Qinshi's objective, and he hurriedly hurled the jade-glazed cup in his hand. Yuhuan Tianzuan's reaction was quick enough. However, he was still a beat slower than Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell. As soon as Qinshi stood up, Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell transmitted his voice to everyone in the square. Everyone heed my command. Protect the soul mirror. Do not let this person near the soul mirror even if you have to perish. Many of the divine generals were already standing not far away from the soul mirror, so they immediately rushed toward it upon hearing Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell's command and charged toward Qinshi with all their might. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. Qinshi ignored the raging flames on his body and pounced toward the soul mirror. Dozens of divine generals tried to stop him, but Qinshi roared with bloodshot eyes like a crazed beast, "Get out of my way!" before he could finish his sentence. The true origin energy that was filled with blood and chi was like a huge fan. In an instant, the tens of original infant stage cultivators were sent flying. Back then Zhao Zilong had entered and exited Changban 7 times. Today, Qinshi was going to enter and exit Dragon Head Peak 7 times as well. This was the so-called, where the sword points, the heart points. The road ahead is perilous. Even if there are millions of enemies, I will still press on. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com. The mobile version of wondrousbook.com. Chapter 423. Qinshi had been secretly observing the situation for a long time. The heaven-bearing effect floating mirror had been suspended in the air above the plaza this entire time, and it was constantly spinning like a top while releasing some kind of unknown energy fluctuations into the outside world. From the looks of it, the soul mirror seemed to be in use right now. Qinshi had been imprisoned in the dark space for 200 years, so he had no idea how much time had passed in the outside world. However, seeing that the heavenly venerates and the 5 divine generals were still on Dragon Head Peak, Qinshi was extremely hopeful. He could only pray that there was still time. Yingying's soul wouldn't dissipate as long as the soul bridge wasn't completed. As such, he had to take the soul mirror. Even if he couldn't, he had to disrupt the ceremony today. From beginning to end, Qinshi's goal had always been resolute. In order to successfully approach the soul mirror, Qinshi had even used himself as bait to take on the 3 divine flames head-on. He then pretended to be defeated in order to make the 3 heavenly venerates let their guard down. After all, no one would have thought that everything he was doing was for the soul mirror. On Dragon Head Peak, Qinshi charged toward the soul mirror as quickly as he could in his entire life. The 3 heavenly venerates were flying in the sky, and even though they understood his intentions, it was already too late for them to stop him. The only ones who could stop Qinshi were the 5 divine generals who were closest to the soul mirror. The divine generals naturally had varying cultivation bases. Some were early Yuanying while others were peak Yuanying. In short, none of them were weaker than Yuanying. However, when Qinshi was faced with these Yuanying, it was as if he had been injected with stimulants, and he instantly unleashed an astonishing aura that was far more powerful than before. Peak Soul Formation Stage. Blood Essence Ignition. Qinshi had just consumed a complete nourishment pill refined from the Adumbra flower not long ago. However, this medicinal effect alone was not enough to make up for the loss of blood essence. At best, it could only heal his internal injuries and provide a little help for Qinshi to condense another drop of blood essence. Qinshi had already burned 2 drops of blood essence before, so this was the last drop of blood essence in his body. Once this drop of blood essence was completely burned out, Qinshi would fall into an extremely weak state. If he wasn't careful, he might even die because of this. Did he regret it? He would never regret it. Even if I die, I will not let my heart be covered in dust. One thing to note here is, even though Qinshi had burned his blood essence and was ready to cut off all means of retreat, he had never thought of dying here. Because he still had to go home. He would go back to visit Yingying and take care of Nianyan. The family of 3 still had a lot of happiness to enjoy. Therefore he could not die here. Perhaps it was because Qinshi was almost obsessed with going home, that the aura he unleashed from burning his blood essence was far more powerful than when he was at his peak. In fact, he was even more powerful than the divine monarch Qinshi of the heavenly Jade Realm, who wielded the Tianyan divine sword. When a person had a firm belief in their heart, they were invincible. Even though he was surrounded by dozens of nascent soul cultivators, Qinshi was not the slightest bit afraid. Instead, like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves, he sent the dozens of cultivators in front of him flying at the same time. The 3 divine flames were still burning fiercely on his body, but Qinshi didn't seem to feel any pain at all. His surging true essence was also strangely seeping with blood energy. In this state where blood and fire intertwined, Qinshi was on the brink of insanity. After using brute force to clear the obstacles in front of him, he abruptly pounced toward the soul mirror. The soul mirror was still spinning in midair. Qinshi could even clearly see the patterns on the mirror. However, just as his fingers were about to touch the soul mirror, this primordial treasure that had saved the primordial immortal cultivators suddenly emitted an extremely dazzling light. Qinshi didn't even have time to react before this ray of light was like a battering ram, violently sending him flying. Pfft. Qinshi spat out a mouthful of blood as he crashed heavily to the ground. Qinshi didn't stop as he looked at the invisible wall in front of him. He immediately flew up as soon as he landed and charged toward the soul mirror again. It was clear that the soul mirror was protected by a spell formation. Under normal circumstances, Qinshi might have been able to think of a way to break the spell formation. However, in today's situation, he could only rely on brute force to break the spell formation. Without any hesitation, the image of the divine sword appeared in Qinshi's hand again. It was just a defensive spell formation. Even if the Tai Ching sacred ancestor was here, Qinshi would still destroy it. Break? As Qinshi swung his sword, countless images of the divine sword appeared in the air. The third technique of the Moonlight Sword technique, 10,000 Swords of Origin. An endless stream of sword shadows rose up like a long dragon and crashed into the spell formation protecting the soul mirror. Each sword represented a single collision. When the first sword smashed into the array and shattered, the second sword followed closely behind. One sword after another, it was an endless stream of attacks. The sword shadows would not stop until the spell formation was broken. In the blink of an eye, the spell formation had been struck thousands of times, and each time, it was at the same spot. Qinshi was trying to break the spell formation with a single point. Even though the spell formation had been set up by the sacred ancestor many years ago, it was beginning to falter in the face of such violent attacks. How could the 3 heavenly venerables allow Qinshi to break the spell formation so easily? Thus, while Qinshi was busy hacking at the spell formation, the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man crashed into Qinshi's back. Bam! With a loud bang, the power of the 3 lanterns crashed into Qinshi's body. This was the combined attack of 3 soul formation cultivators. However, Qinshi gritted his teeth and endured it. He was still in the same position as before. The moment the 3 lanterns hit him, Qinshi did not resist at all. Instead, he used his body as a medium to increase the power of the spell formation by 30%. Break. Ah. Qinshi roared angrily, and a crack appeared in the spell formation protecting the soul mirror. Seeing this, Qinshi couldn't help but smile. He didn't care how serious his injuries were. he swung the sword in his hand and viciously slashed at the damned mirror. The first technique of the Moonlight Sword technique, Hidden Void Sword. After exhausting all of his true essence to slash out this sword strike, Qin Shi's heart that had been tightly wounded finally relaxed. At this moment, he was very calm and relaxed, because he really did his best. Qin Shi didn't look at the soul mirror again. Instead he turned around and looked behind him. As he turned around, the shadows of the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man appeared clearly in his eyes, and they became bigger and bigger. Qin Shi smiled and didn't resist anymore. He just calmly closed his eyes. Ying, I'm sorry, I failed to keep our promise. Yin, I'm sorry, Daddy can't take care of you anymore. The three lanterns came crashing down. However, Qin Shi calmly opened his arms and began to recall the happy memories of the past. He was very tired. It was time to rest. The only regret was, I might not be able to see you again. I'm sorry, the two women I love the most in my life. There was no end and there was no messy ending. Don't be agitated, don't be angry, let's talk nicely. Please remember the domain name of this book.com, the mobile version of this book.com. Chapter 424. On Dragon Head Peak. The array formation protecting the soul mirror was actually set up by the Grand Pure One himself. Although many years had passed and the power of the array was no longer what it used to be, it was not something a peak soul formation cultivator could easily break. Under the state of burning essence blood, if Qin Shi was determined to run, the three lanterns of heaven, earth, and man would not be able to easily hit him. However, he did not run. Instead, he gritted his teeth and endured the combined attack of the three celestial venerables. He used his body as a medium and successfully transferred the power of the three celestial venerables to the array formation. With the combination of the two, the array formation was immediately broken. Defensive formations generally had a self-healing ability, so even if the formation was broken, this small hole, which was only an inch wide, would quickly heal. At that moment, there was not much time left for Qin Shi to react. There were actually only two choices left for him. He could leave decisively before his blood essence was completely burned and find an opportunity to return to Dragon Head Peak in the future to take revenge. Or he could fight to the death and use this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to destroy the soul mirror in one fell swoop. Qin Shi did not know when Heaven Capital would be able to build the soul bridge. If the soul bridge was built quickly, then what should he use to save Ying? Wouldn't everything still be back to square one? Therefore he chose the second method. Instead of running, he resolutely swung the sword in his hand. He, who was already covered in wounds, completely lost the ability to resist after using all his strength to swing the sword. This was the core of the entire great world and also the most noble place in Heaven Capital. In addition to the three celestial venerables who were eager to take him down, there were also countless 5 divine generals and Rakshasa star lords watching from the side. Qin Shi chose his lover, and gave himself up. After all, the 3 celestial venerables were not wooden dummies. Naturally, they would not give him time to think calmly. When Qin Shi decided to swing that sword, the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man once again smashed towards him. Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your lover? Human nature could not withstand the test. Perhaps if the scene was different, Qin Shi would not necessarily give himself up to save Qin Ruoying. But at least at this moment he still bravely shouted that, I am willing. Compared to everyone present, Qin Shi's cultivation was indeed very high, but he was not at the invincible Vajra level. Without the protection of a magic treasure, how could the combined attack of 3 celestial venerables be so easy to withstand? He had already taken it head-on twice, so when he saw the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man smashing toward him again, Qin Shi calmly closed his eyes. The 3 lanterns came crashing down. Qin Shi could even clearly feel a wave of heat hitting his face. After that, the dazzling flames swallowed him up like a ferocious beast from the primordial times. Boom! A huge explosion rang out from the Dragon Head Peak once again, causing the entire floating island to tremble violently. The place where Qin Shi was standing suddenly burst into flames. The fire was extremely ferocious. Whether it was the air or the bricks, everything was ignited at the slightest touch. If it weren't for the Imperial Extreme Hall being protected by a grand array, it would have long been turned into ruins by the raging flames. When the surrounding heaven and earth spirit chi had been burned out, a vacuum appeared in the square. The fire filled the line of sight. Yuhuan Tianzuan had been using his divine sense to observe Qin Shi's situation. In his perception, Qin Shi's aura was getting weaker and weaker, and he estimated that it wouldn't be long before he was completely burned to ashes. Thus, Yuhuan Qinzuan filled the square with soul-summoning banners, as if he had set up an inescapable net. As long as Qin Shi's primordial spirit left his body, the soul-summoning banners would directly detain him and leave him for Yuhuan Qinzuan to slowly torture in the future. Without his physical body, no matter how strong Qin Shi was, he was just a tiger without teeth and claws. When the time came, wouldn't he be at his mercy? It had to be said that Yuhuan Qinzuan's idea was indeed very good. But he waited for a long time, and even when Qin Shi's aura had completely disappeared, he still didn't see Qin Shi's primordial spirit fly out of the flames. Seeing this, Yuhuan Qinzuan immediately frowned and hurriedly recalled the myriad spirit ancient Yi with the lapis lazuli lamp, then carefully searched the square. The square was surrounded by soul-summoning banners. As long as Qin Shi's primordial spirit left his body, it would definitely be captured by the soul-summoning banners. Qin Shi was already in a state of exhaustion, so his primordial spirit should be very weak. How could it have silently escaped from under his nose? What's going on? Where is he? Where did his primordial spirit go? After being hit by Qin Shi's sword, the soul mirror fell to the ground like a broken mirror, motionless. And where Qin Shi had been? At this moment, there was nothing but a charred ground. The three celestial venerables carefully looked around. In the end, it was celestial venerable wondrous spells who broke the silence first. Could it be that his primordial spirit didn't leave his body? Instead, it turned into ashes along with his body? A trace of anger flashed across Yuhuan Qinzuan's face when he heard this. He couldn't help but flick his sleeves. Impossible. This person's cultivation is unparalleled. Does he not understand the principle of sacrificing the rook to save the king? His primordial spirit must be hidden somewhere here. Perhaps he used some secret technique to hide it from us. Generals, listen up. Today, even if we have to turn Dragon Head Peak upside down, we must find that bastard's primordial spirit. Yes, sir. Following Heavenly Venerate Yuhuan's command, the divine generals and star venerates who had been watching from the sidelines all rushed to the plaza and began a vigorous cleaning. He was certain that Qin Shi's primordial spirit was still in the array, so he was determined to find Qin Shi. In fact, the moment the three lanterns of heaven, earth and man blasted toward Qin Shi's figure strangely disappeared. Not only did the three celestial venerables not notice anything strange, but even Qin Shi himself didn't notice anything strange. Qin Shi closed his eyes and waited for death. The pain he imagined did not come for a long time. When he opened his eyes again, there was only darkness in front of him. Yuhuan Qinzuan was gone. Dragon Head Peak was gone. Even the entire great world was gone. There was only endless darkness in front of him. Qin Shi was all too familiar with this kind of darkness. Why am I back here again? Qin Shi was startled, countless thoughts flashing through her mind in an instant. Could it be that he had been in this dark space all this time? He had never left at all? Everything he had experienced before. Was it all an illusion? How could it be? Qin Shi instinctively wanted to fly up and take a look. At this moment he suddenly felt a heart-wrenching pain from his body, along with a familiar burning sensation. Thus, Qin Shi immediately checked his condition and confirmed that these injuries were caused by the three lanterns of heaven, earth and man. In other words, everything he had experienced before was not an illusion. So, did he return to that endless space of darkness? Thinking of this, Qin Shi's heart suddenly felt as if stormy waves had been set off. She couldn't figure out what was going on. This place was really too strange. Just as Qin Shi was puzzled, a woman's voice suddenly rang in his ears. Do you regret it? Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Website. Chapter 425. Do you regret it? In the endless darkness, a woman's voice suddenly rang softly in Qin Shi's ears. The woman's voice was gentle and soft, and there seemed to be some sadness and sorrow lingering in it. And it was such a seemingly simple question. In Qin Shi's ears, it was no less than thunder in the sky. Who's talking? At this moment, Qin Shi was like a cat with its hair standing on end. His body shook violently, and a ring-shaped true origin light pillar suddenly flew out of his body. The light pillar dispelled the darkness and also calmed Qin Shi down a little. Then, he focused and held his breath and began to look around vigilantly. Qin Shi was very familiar with this mysterious dark space that had imprisoned him for 200 years. Just like the last time he was here, there was nothing in this place. There was no light, no air, no radiation, no magnetic field. There was no spiritual energy of heaven and earth. But the woman's voice just now was so real, as if she was leaning against his ear and whispering softly. For safety reasons, Qin immediately released his divine sense, and with himself as the center, he carefully explored the darkness. But, in this endless darkness, there was not even a speck of dust, let alone a person who could speak? Could it be that I'm hallucinating? Qin was somewhat uncertain. After all, he had experienced too many strange things and his brain could no longer react. But just as he was feeling puzzled, the woman's voice rang again. Do you regret it? This time, Qin finally heard it clearly. He was not hallucinating, and there was really someone leaning against his ear and whispering softly. After confirming that he did not hear wrongly, Qin's heart suddenly trembled violently. Because he had no idea where the voice came from. It felt as if a female ghost was leaning on his back, asking him if he had eaten dinner today, and he turned around to look for her, but he could not see the female ghost. How could Qin not be surprised? There was actually someone in this world who could approach him silently, and he could not sense the other party's presence at all? How was that possible? After all, no matter how severe his injuries were, he was still at the peak of the divine transformation stage. However, he was unable to detect this woman's aura at all. He couldn't even pinpoint the direction of her voice. Who is it? Are you talking to me? Can you show yourself? Qin asked her question towards the void. The woman did not answer him. After a while, the woman's voice sounded again. Do you regret it? It was still the same problem. This made Qin suddenly realize. The woman's tone was exactly the same as the previous 2 times. He felt that she was like a recorder that could only repeat the same sentence over and over again. Regret what? Do you regret it? I don't understand what you mean. Can you be more specific? Do you regret it? *CK. Do you regret it? Do you regret it? No matter what Qin said, women would always say the same thing. Therefore, Qin thought about it seriously. He was a coding farmer, so he was naturally very familiar with mechanical commands. Therefore, Qin was very suspicious that this woman should be a reflection left behind by a senior expert. She did not have the ability to think and could only follow the program's settings mechanically. If the woman's question was the username, then Qin's answer was obviously the password. Only by providing the correct password could he successfully log into the account and proceed with the next step. Therefore, when the woman asked again, Qin answered decisively, I don't regret it. He originally just wanted to verify his guess. Who would have thought? The moment the words I don't regret it blurted out, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down from the endless dark space. The lightning came extremely quickly. Before Qin could even react, the lightning had already struck not far in front of him. In front of him was an empty dark void. However, after the lightning struck, it seemed to have struck something and instantly exploded into a large ball of purple flames. The scene in front of him was simply too strange. Qin subconsciously wanted to turn around and leave, only to find that he could not move his body. At this moment, the ball of purple flames floating in the void slowly drifted toward him. Qin watched as the flames gradually approached him. He tried his best to break free, but his body seemed to have been separated from his soul and did not listen to his commands at all. One had to know that he was at the peak of the soul formation stage. At this moment, he was like a puppet that was being manipulated by someone at will. Faced with such a strange situation, Qin suddenly had a human emotion that had not appeared in hundreds of years: confusion and helplessness. Confusion and uneasiness. Humans were always afraid of things that they did not know, and Qin was no exception. It was also at this moment that he finally realized how insignificant he was. So what if he was at the soul formation stage? The purple flames were getting closer and closer to Qin. It was only when they were about to touch him that the purple flames suddenly stopped. Then, under Qin's dumbfounded expression, a shackled arm covered in scars suddenly stretched out from the flames. First it was the left hand, then the right hand. Like Sadako crawling out of a TV, the person slowly crawled out of the flames along with the clanking sound of the shackles. Perhaps it was because of the spell, but Qin could not see the person's face at all, so he could only judge based on the slender figure and the high bulging chest. The person in front of him should be a woman. The way the woman appeared was very strange, but what really shocked Qin was the way the woman was dressed. He saw that her wrists, ankles, neck, waist, abdomen, ribs and shoulder blades were all locked in shackles. 9 chains thicker than her arms were connected to the shackles, so every time the woman moved, the chains all over her body would jingle non-stop. Her clothes were ragged and Qin could even see half of her chest. And the parts of her body that were not covered by clothes were full of terrifying scars. Qin was stunned. The woman's appearance was completely different from what he had imagined. He originally thought that the other party was some hidden expert, at least at the same level as the Taiching divine ancestor, so she could easily bring him here from the Dragon Head Peak. Who would have thought that this woman was dressed like a prisoner? She stared at the woman in front of him in a daze, and only a blank was left in his mind. And at this moment, the woman who crawled out of the flames directly pressed her blurry face against Shi's face, and then asked again, "Are you willing?" Chapter 426. Are you willing? Even though the woman's face was only 2 or 3 centimeters away from Shi, he still couldn't see the woman's face clearly. He only felt that his vision was blurry, and he couldn't even distinguish her facial features. It felt like a thick layer of mosaic. Shi didn't know what the woman wanted to ask, but he didn't dare to answer. After all, he didn't even know what the woman was asking. What if he answered wrongly? A bank card password would be temporarily frozen if it was entered wrongly 3 times, not to mention this strange and mysterious woman in front of him. Although the woman was close, she couldn't feel any trace of her existence. There was no body temperature, no breath, no sound, and no smell. Whether it was breath, or aura. This woman had none of that. She was like a lifeless, still painting. As long as Shi closed his eyes, he wouldn't be able to sense the woman's existence. But as soon as he opened his eyes, the woman's blurry face would immediately appear in front of him. Are you willing? Just like before, the woman waited for about 2 minutes. After seeing that Shi didn't answer, she asked again. Her voice was still so gentle and soft. After Shi heard this, the pressure in his heart increased. Should he answer? Or should he not answer? Shi was tied to the ground by the woman. Other than his head, his body was completely out of his control. This stalemate obviously wasn't a good idea. So, after Shi thought about it again and again, he asked tentatively, "Dare I ask? What's your question?" "There's only one question, are you willing or not? How can I answer that?" Shi originally only wanted to test her, to see if the woman would still ask questions mechanically like before. But he didn't expect that after the woman listened. Her head suddenly moved slightly as if she was looking at him up and down. Seeing this, Shi suddenly had a guess in his mind. This woman didn't seem to be a simple reflection? Sure enough, after the woman looked at him up and down, she asked the question. "Are you willing to sacrifice yourself for your lover?" "I'm willing." As soon as the woman finished speaking, Shi gave the answer decisively. Wasn't this nonsense? If it wasn't for Ying, how could he be easily defeated by 3 heavenly masters? Shi could be considered to have walked through the gates of hell. Although he couldn't figure out why he suddenly returned to the dark space, it didn't stop Shi from making bold guesses. This must have something to do with this mysterious woman. Since the woman had brought him back from the gates of hell, she probably wasn't just playing with him for fun. Therefore, after much consideration, Shi decided to answer the woman's question first. He also wanted to see what strange reaction the woman would have next. However, what Shi didn't expect. He gave the answer, but the woman did not respond at all, as if a computer had crashed. Shi was depressed. After 2 or 3 minutes, the woman, she slowly raised her right hand and gently placed it on Shi's cheek. The arm that was shackled and covered in scars was so real. However, Shi didn't feel like he was being touched by a foreign object. This scene was very strange. It was like the sun shining on the arm, and then the shadow of the arm was reflected on Shi's face. Shi couldn't feel the woman touching him at all. However, his eyes could clearly see that the woman's palm was continuously caressing his face. What's going on? The woman's behavior made Shi very uncomfortable. However, there was nothing he could do. He could only watch as he was being molested. He was at the peak of the soul formation stage, but now he was reduced to such a state. It was really sad and lamentable. Since he couldn't resist, he could only endure silently. Shi closed his eyes with a numb expression, but his mind was working quickly. Everything in front of him was too strange. Even with his experience, he couldn't figure out what kind of existence this woman was. This scene was very similar to how he treated his sister-in-law in the past. Didn't Qin Xueqing, who was still an ordinary warrior, also let Shi do whatever he wanted? The peak strength did not understand the world of the soul formation stage. Just like the soul formation stage did not understand the world of the void realm. Even when facing his master, Shi didn't feel so lost. So it was obvious. This mysterious woman in front of him. She might not just be a void realm expert. Thinking of this, Shi couldn't help but open his eyes and keep looking at the woman in front of him. He was trying to find a secret from the woman. But at this moment, in the depths of the endless void, a bolt of lightning suddenly struck down. The moment the lightning flashed, not only was Qinshi shocked, but even the woman seemed to be shocked. The woman hurriedly turned her head to look, and the chains on her body suddenly made a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. Then Qinshi's divine sense seemed to have been electrified, and he finally detected a trace of vital essence fluctuation in the depths of the void. This fluctuation was extremely violent, and it could be said to be, the sky fell and the earth cracked. It was earth-shattering. The first bolt of lightning had just disappeared, and it was followed by another bolt of lightning. One bolt after another, and it didn't stop at all. In just a few breaths, there were hundreds and thousands of bolts of lightning striking the depths of the void. The bright light of the lightning was particularly dazzling in the darkness. In each bolt of lightning, there seemed to be a huge wave of vital essence fluctuation. Qinshi had never seen such an exaggerated wave of vital essence fluctuation, and he only felt that he was so small in front of this wave of energy. It was as panicked as an ordinary person facing the brilliant power of heaven. There was a great terror in the depths of the void. It was like a puppy facing a tiger or a grass snake facing a dragon. The strong pressure brought about by the difference in realm almost made Qinshi breathless. Pressure was a very mysterious thing. Here was an example. When Qinshi faced a group of martial artists on Earth who didn't know anything, as long as he deliberately showed a trace of hostility, the other party would be so scared that they would piss their pants, and probably not even be able to stand properly. This was pressure. This special phenomenon would only occur when there was an absolute difference in realm between two people. It came from the instinct of life, so even immortal cultivators were no exception. Even though Qinshi had stayed in the heavenly jade world for a whole 500 years, he had never seen such a strong pressure. This big shot who suddenly appeared in the depths of the void. Was he just at the insightful void realm? Even if someone said that he was a tribulation true immortal, Qinshi would still believe it. And while Qinshi was struggling to resist the strong pressure, the chains on the woman's body suddenly tightened, and an unknown force was trying to pull her back into the purple flame. The woman tried to struggle, but the 9 chains on her body seemed to be electrified. The more she struggled, the more pain the chains would bring her. Finally, the woman couldn't hold on any longer. But the moment she was about to be pulled back into the purple flame by the chains, the woman suddenly stretched out her right hand and then pointed at Qinshi's forehead. Chapter 427. In the depths of the void, dazzling lightning flashed one after another. Although there was no sound of thunder, every time the lightning flashed, it would set off a huge wave of vital essence. A strong pressure kept surging from the darkness. Qinshi was in the middle of this pressure. He only felt that he was now like a small sampan floating in the sea, and could be crushed into powder by the stormy waves at any time. Qinshi struggled against the invisible pressure from the depths of the void. The woman struggled against the 9 chains on her body. There seemed to be an unknown power in the purple flame, and it was this power that restrained the mysterious woman in front of him. The woman struggled frantically. But these 9 chains seemed to be wrapped around the capstan of an ancient city gate. Every time the capstan turned, the chains would tighten inch by inch toward the purple flame. Purple flame, azure lightning. The mysterious woman, 9 chains. Everything looked so strange. But the really strange thing was, no matter how shocking the scene in front of Qinshi was, he did not hear any strange sounds. Except for the occasional clanging of the chains, Qinshi could not hear any sound. The dark space was still so quiet. Even if the woman seemed to be howling at the sky, Qinshi did not hear any sound she made. It was as if he was deaf. Apart from that strong pressure, even his divine sense could not detect any unusual fluctuations. What was happening in front of him? It was completely beyond the scope of Qinshi's understanding. The lightning flashed faster and faster, and the purple flame grew stronger and stronger. The woman was gradually unable to hold on. But the moment she was about to be pulled back into the flame, the woman's right index finger suddenly pointed between Qinshi's eyebrows. At that moment, Qinshi suddenly felt a bone-piercing chill. It was as if his eyebrows had suddenly touched a piece of ice. It was so cold that he could not help but shiver. Then Qinshi did not even have time to react. The past events of his life rushed to his mind like a tide and appeared in front of him one by one. It was like a movie that started rewinding at 32 times the speed of the movie when the ending was clearly shown. From Longzhou Peak to Daiyu Island, from Shangjing to Zhonghai, from Tianshan to Earth, Qinshi also reverted from Soul Formation to Yuanying, then to Golden Core and Foundation Establishment, and finally back to being an ordinary person. The timeline was reversed and the past was still vivid in his mind. Qin was like a spectator sitting in front of the TV, watching his life in a daze. Soon the movie returned to the beginning. It was the scene when he worked overtime until late at night and couldn't get a taxi, so he could only run home in the rain. A bolt of lightning struck down, the image stopped abruptly. "It's you?" He turned around and looked at her with a gentle gaze. However, in the blink of an eye, his thoughts had already turned 1,000 times. Qin gaped at the mysterious woman in front of him. He had thousands of questions in his heart, but before he could ask, the woman was dragged back into the flames by the chains. And the moment the woman entered the flames, she seemed to have heard Qin's voice, so a faint smile appeared on her originally pained face. Although Qin couldn't see the woman's face, he could clearly feel that the woman seemed to be smiling at him. Finally, the woman's figure was swallowed by the purple flames. The lightning in the distance disappeared in a flash. After the purple flames fluttered for a moment, they instantly disappeared like fireworks. And as the flames went out, the pressure that came from the depths of the void also slowly faded. Qin was like a spectator, staring blankly as the darkness enveloped him again. Everything returned to silence. He could finally move again. Huff, huff, huff. As soon as he was free, Qin couldn't help but start to pant heavily. Although the strong pressure had disappeared, he still hadn't recovered from the fear. Qin forced himself to calm down a little, then sat cross-legged in the void. And at this moment, Qin suddenly realized that his injuries had healed, and the true origin in his body was abundant, almost at the peak. What was going on? Could it be that the woman cured him before she left? Thinking of this, Qin couldn't help but be shocked. And he suddenly had an illusion that he was trapped in a deadly illusion. Illusion attacks the heart, and attacking the heart was the most important thing. There was nothing in the dark space, so naturally there was no reference. After Qin's strength recovered, everything seemed to return to the moment when he opened the gate of heaven with his sword and fell into the dark space. So he couldn't help but wonder if he had fallen into some kind of illusion again. Everything that he had experienced before, was it all just an illusion? This guess was actually very reasonable. After all, illusion arrays were usually more terrifying than killing arrays. However, Qin immediately rejected this guess. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. The pressure was so real and the woman's existence was so real. No illusion could be so realistic, so everything that he had experienced just now was definitely real. Qin had encountered the insightful void before because his master was at the insightful void. And Qin had been lucky enough to see the Tao integration above the insightful void. However, even a Tao integration stage senior wouldn't be able to exert such terrifying pressure on him. So, the great terror that was emitting such a strong pressure in the depths of the void was definitely not at the insightful void stage, and might even surpass the Tao integration and reach the legendary tribulation bath. Immortal cultivation, immortal cultivation. This was the real, immortal. Qin didn't sense any aura from the woman. But just based on the 9 chains on her body and the move she showed before she left, Qin had reason to believe that this woman should be at the same level as that great terror. Moreover, this mysterious woman seemed to have an inexplicable kindness toward him. Coupled with her last finger, Qin instantly had a guess in his heart. Could it be the reason why he went to the heavenly jade world for no reason? Everything was because of this mysterious woman just now. Qin's heart was filled with questions. But no matter how hard he racked his brains, he still couldn't figure out the reason. There were still too few clues. One had to know that this was an important figure that only existed in myths and legends, and he was lucky enough to come into close contact with her today. Although he only said a few words, he resisted a strong pressure. But for Qin, who was already at the soul formation stage, this kind of experience was very rare. So, he immediately sat cross-legged in the void and began to carefully recall the entire process of the woman's appearance. He tried to gain some experience from it, but he didn't expect that when he sat down for a whole 300 years. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 428. In the Dark Space. Qin used a strand of true essence to create a very crude timer, and then he completely went into seclusion. After his previous experience, he didn't dare to waste his true essence at all. Instead, he entered the state of tortoise rest from the beginning, and kept thinking about everything he just saw in his mind. The reason why the woman didn't have any aura on her was that she had an inexplicable kindness toward Qin from the beginning, so she deliberately restrained her aura. If the woman was a prisoner, Then the great terror that appeared later was obviously the prison guard guarding the prisoner. These were two great figures who had the ability to reach the heavens and penetrate the earth. Qin couldn't figure it out, so he focused all his energy on himself. And what he just experienced also made Qin realize for the first time that soul formation was too weak. So weak that even if he came to heaven capital, he couldn't get the soul mirror and save Ying. He was so weak that he could only tremble and be at a loss under the terrifying pressure of others. Qin really didn't like this feeling. So he wanted to use this opportunity to get close to the two great figures to break through to the insightful emptiness realm in one go. Strength was always relative. In the heavenly jade world, he was the dawn divine lord who oversaw a region. On earth he was a god, who was above ordinary people. But in heaven capital, he found that he couldn't deal with the siege of the 10 celestial venerables and 5 divine generals by himself. As for the great terror of the mysterious woman, she was a terrifying existence that Qin didn't even dare to think about before. The comfortable life made Qin gradually forget the first rule, which was natural selection, survival of the fittest. Qin had a monthly salary of more than 10,000, and his life in a small county was too comfortable. But for big cities like Shangjing and Zhonghai, what was more than 10,000 a month? To put it bluntly, in fact he had lowered his own level, which was why he was able to live a carefree life. You have your pursuits and I have my choices. So Qin's previous idea wasn't wrong. His mistake was, the development and progress of society would not stop because of a single person. Following the birth of a child, the price of housing skyrocketed. Even if they were hiding in a small county town with a monthly income of more than 10,000, they began to struggle to make ends meet. When Qin could no longer protect his family with his current strength, that would be when he made a grave mistake. Qin realized his mistake, which was why he was so eager to break through to the insightful emptiness realm. It was the same as when he was eager to break through to the divine transformation realm and step on the path home. Fortunately, as long as a man was willing to work hard, it was never too late. Ren Jingfei founded Huawei at the age of 43. Zhong Qingho founded Waha at the age of 44. Then there was Colonel Sanders of the United States, who didn't even start KFC until he was 66. I was once dressed in fine clothes and riding a horse, young and frivolous. Now he's working diligently and a great talent is a late success. While Qin was trying his best to comprehend the true meaning of the word void, in the dark space, the little fellow was also gradually adapting to her new life, without the company of her parents. As usual, the little fellow made many video calls to Qin every day. For this reason, Wu Lian even specially invited a child psychologist from the capital university to deal with the little fellow's overflowing yearning at any time. The little fellow was like Truman in the movie The Truman Show, living in a fairy tale world that Wu Lian carefully created for her. She gradually got used to video calls with her father, and also gradually got used to her mother's deep sleep. But unfortunately, communication through video calls couldn't compare to the company of real people after all. When the child no longer cried and insisted that her father come home, it meant that her heart had begun to close up. As soon as the video call ended, the smile on the little fellow's face would visibly diminish. She no longer liked new toys and she no longer clamored to play in the ice rink. If the two brothers didn't come to the courtyard to play with her every day, rain or shine, her entire childhood would probably be much dimmer. Toys, cartoons, Big Cat, and the two brothers had already formed the entire content of the little fellow's life. Grandpa was very good to her. Although Grandpa was often in a daze alone and accidentally neglected her existence, the little fellow could still feel Grandpa's deep care for her in her heart. But this care, it was more like the feeling that Aunt Zhang once gave her, rather than the feeling that her parents once gave her. Only when one once had something would one know what it meant to lose it. She began to like holding her phone in a daze in the room alone. Because she grew up, she naturally began to have troubles. Time flew by. It was a new year. Aunt Zhang was very puzzled as to why Qin didn't call her this year, so as soon as the spring festival was over, the old lady took the initiative to call Qin. Unexpectedly, the old lady was fooled by Wang Chuanju, saying that Qin and his family were traveling abroad and wouldn't be back for a long time. Aunt Zhang naturally believed this, so after a series of instructions on the phone, she completely dispelled the idea of visiting the little fellow in Beijing. Even a snail would leave a white mark when it crawled past, let alone a person. Qin's sudden disappearance also completely shattered the network of contacts he had built before. Of course, for him, this kind of network was actually dispensable. But for Nian Nian, a child who grew up relying on her parents' network, All of this was indeed a little too cruel. In the blink of an eye, spring passed and summer arrived. Nianyan was also 6 years old. Perhaps because of his age, Qin Yongyan usually didn't care about any holidays except for the spring festival. If the little fellow hadn't suddenly asked when she came home from school, Qin Yongyan would have even forgotten that he had to celebrate a child's birthday. May 5th. Wasn't today Nianyan's birthday? After looking at the calendar, Qin Yongyan slapped his forehead and realized. After comforting the little fellow for a while, he hurriedly rushed out to buy her a cake. To be honest, although Qin Yongyan had a scholarly, easygoing and otherworldly temperament, he was actually a straight man of steel. A straight man. Usually he only knew how to practice martial arts. But now he suddenly wanted him to make the child happy. Wasn't this making things difficult for him? If the little girl in the cake shop didn't kindly remind him, Qin Yongyan wouldn't even know to prepare 6 candles for Nianyan. Fortunately, Nianyan's temperament had changed. If it was when she was still alive, this little thing would immediately cry out of grievance. Nianyan didn't cry. After seeing her grandfather lighting the candles in a hurry, she followed what her mother taught her before, closed her eyes and seriously made a wish. Her wish was very simple, that was, she hoped that her father could come back soon. Therefore, after simply eating a few mouthfuls of cake, the little fellow let Qin Yongyan accompany her to sing Insects Fly, just like how she used to celebrate her birthday. The dark sky was low, followed by the bright stars. Insects fly, who are you thinking of? The stars in the sky shed tears, the roses on the ground withered. The cold wind blows, as long as you accompany me. Chapter 429. Nianyan was 6 years old. Without the company of her parents, the boring time seemed to pass faster and faster. In the blink of an eye, the little girl had already graduated from Donghuimen kindergarten. It was time for her to go to primary school. August 30th, reporting day. Early in the morning, after Qin Yongyan helped the little girl wash up, the two of them got on the bus and then went to the primary school affiliated to Capital University, located near Zhuanwoman. This was the growth path that Qin had planned for the little girl a long time ago. Therefore, after Nianyan graduated from Donghuimen kindergarten, she didn't even have to go for an interview. She directly got a place to enroll in Capital University affiliated primary school. And because of her, the two brothers naturally easily got 2 very precious places. Because they had been living with Xia Kaiji recently, the two brothers couldn't report with Nianyan today. They could only arrange to meet her at the reporting office later. Qin Yongyan originally thought that Nianyan would inevitably feel a little scared and even unwilling to go to school when she suddenly changed to an unfamiliar environment. Therefore, before they left, Qin Yongyan was actually mentally prepared for a tough battle. But what he never expected was, after Nianyan walked into this unfamiliar school, her face didn't have the usual fear and uneasiness that was commonly seen on other children. Instead, it was like she was touring a park. While she walked slowly to the reporting office, her eyes were constantly looking at the classmates who passed by her. To be honest, with her calm appearance, she didn't look like a first-grade child who had just entered school at all. Instead, she looked more like a 4th or 5th grade child. As one of the top experimental primary schools in the country, the Capital Affiliated Primary School was not a private school. Therefore, the moment one entered the school, it gave off a feeling of simple elegance with green bricks and gray tiles. There was also a quiet, beautiful, scholarly, and rich cultural atmosphere. This extremely scholarly atmosphere naturally formed a sharp contrast with the childlike atmosphere of the kindergarten. In addition, there was also a fundamental difference between primary school and kindergarten. After all, kindergarten was mainly for the experience of life, while primary school was where the real learning began. Such as the timetable, work and rest schedule, exam results, homework, and other nightmarish things would also haunt them from this moment on until they became adults. And it was also from today onwards that Nianyan had a new identity, namely, students. Yes, primary school students. Nianyan was assigned to Year 1, Class 2. This class assignment method was randomly assigned by the computer, so after the little fellow sat in the classroom, she waited for a long time but did not see the brothers. Qin Yongyan asked the teacher and found out that the two brothers had been assigned to Year 1 Class 3 next door. It was a sad story. Qin Yongyan was worried that the little girl would be scared, so he quickly comforted her and promised that he would find a way to put her in the same class as the two brothers. Who would have thought that the little fellow only nodded blankly after hearing this, and did not show any extreme reaction. On the other hand, the two brothers in the next class were so anxious that they were about to cry because they couldn't find Nianyan, The first graders had just graduated from kindergarten, so they more or less carried the habits they had developed in kindergarten. Therefore, the classroom gradually quieted down after the homeroom teacher and the subject teacher arrived. The homeroom teacher first did a simple self-introduction, then began to distribute various kinds of information collection forms to the parents. This was the first time parents and teachers met. The first graders couldn't sit still, so the whole process didn't take very long. After the homeroom teacher took back the forms, she asked the parents to follow her to the multimedia classroom, where the school would officially hold a parent conference for the first graders. During this time, the children in each class had to stay in the classroom and be led by the teacher to play games with them. After the parent conference ended, the children would be familiar with the school environment, and the new students' registration would be completed successfully. They only had to wait for school to officially start the day after tomorrow. There were no problems with the school's arrangements. However, after Qin Yongyan followed the homeroom teacher to the multimedia classroom, there was a small commotion in Year 1 Class 2. As for the reason for the commotion, it was completely because of an unlucky brat. After the parents followed the homeroom teacher to the multimedia classroom, the children were guided by the teacher to play with plasticine. Nian was wearing a white dress today. Qin Ruoying personally picked it for her. With her rosy cheeks and big watery eyes, she looked very stunning. Yes, just like her mother back then. With such an outstanding appearance and a faint fragrance on her body, the boys in the class would peek at her from time to time from the moment she walked into the classroom. Children at this age still had a vague understanding of gender, and it was more out of curiosity. Beauty was innate because it was determined by genes. Most children would enter the aesthetic sensitivity stage when they were 3 years old. They would even choose colors that they liked, such as red, blue, etc. Therefore, don't think that children couldn't distinguish between beauty and ugliness. Not only did adults like beautiful women, but children also liked beautiful women. Nian was clearly a living beauty. Most children were very obedient, but there were always a few exceptions, which was commonly known as brats. Unfortunately, there was a brat sitting diagonally behind Nian. Although this brat was only 6 years old this year, he was very mischievous. He was not afraid of parents or teachers at all. It seemed that when he was in kindergarten he was the tyrant of the class. Nian was so cute, so the brat naturally had his eyes on her from the beginning. Of course, this brat's heart was not as dirty and dark as the adults. He just instinctively wanted to get close to Nian. However, the way he approached others was completely unacceptable to ordinary people. This brat took advantage of the time when the teacher was teaching the other children to play with plasticine to climb to the ground and quietly crawl behind Nian. He wanted to lift Nian's skirt, just like he used to lift other people's skirts. However, just as he held the little girl's skirt tightly with a smirk on his face, the little girl who was seriously playing with the plasticine seemed to have been prepared. She suddenly stood up from her seat and slapped him directly in the face. Slap. Nian did not use much strength, but the crisp sound of the slap alarmed the entire classroom. The brat was stunned. He was stunned for a long time. When he saw the teacher rush over, the brat's grievance seemed to have found an outlet. He couldn't help but burst into tears. Chen, what are you doing? Chapter 430. Chen. Compared to the recently popular names like Zixuan, Sini, Sihan, and Kursin, the little girl's name seemed particularly ordinary. But because of her outstanding appearance, the teacher remembered this child who was as cute as a porcelain doll at a glance. She didn't know if it was a psychological effect, but most people would discover a strange phenomenon during their school days, and that was, a good-looking girl would usually be the class monitor of the class. Of course, the prerequisite was that the girl had self-respect and self-respect. Perhaps it was because their beautiful appearance gave them more attention, but at the same time, it also gave them more pressure. In addition, girls matured early, so these girls were usually more mature and sensible than ordinary children. Nian's appearance was already very outstanding, and in addition she was influenced by rich spirit energy all year round. So even if she didn't cultivate, she had a temperament that was far superior to other children her age. Therefore, the moment the teacher saw her, she had already listed the little girl as a candidate for class monitor. If her performance in the future was good and her results could keep up with the rest of the team, this position would obviously be decided internally. But no one would have thought that the little girl who easily gained the approval of all the teachers would beat another child to tears on the first day of school. The naughty child sat on the ground and cried loudly, while Nian stood there and looked at him coldly. Seeing this, the teacher couldn't help but be angry, so she couldn't help but scold her. However, Nian didn't defend herself. Instead, she pursed her lips and looked indifferent. School bullying was a situation that occurred in every school and even every class. As one of the top teachers in the country, the teachers of the capital-affiliated primary school naturally did a lot of research in this area. The naughty child deliberately cried loudly, hoping that the teacher would be biased towards him. Fortunately, the teacher wasn't a fool, so before confirming the truth, she didn't dare to make a conclusion. Seeing that Nian didn't continue to beat him, the teacher came between the two children and patiently asked the reason. In fact, when the teacher realized that the naughty child wasn't in his seat, she had a guess in her heart. So, she immediately relaxed her expression and tried to communicate with the little girl. "Chenyin, tell me, why did you bully your classmate?" Hearing this, the little girl pouted and replied stiffly, "Daddy said that no one is allowed to lift my skirt. I'm a girl, whoever lifts my skirt is a pervert. Dad said that this is a matter of principle, so I must give him a good thrashing." The little fellow's words were loud and clear, full of righteousness. After hearing this, the teacher didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He was right, but how old was this child? How would she know anything about erotic things? It was probably just for fun. Teacher understood the entire process of what had happened. In such a situation, it was wrong to favor either side. The naughty brat had sneakily come over to lift her skirt, but he didn't expect that this time he would lift a steel plate, so she raised her hand and gave him a slap. It was wrong to lift her skirt, but it was even more wrong to hit her. Therefore, after the teacher pointed out the two children's mistakes, she asked them to apologize to each other. "Chenyin, if you encounter such a situation in the future, you can tell teacher directly. Teacher will definitely criticize him severely, but you have to remember you're not allowed to hit anyone in the future, understand?" The teacher felt that the nature of hitting someone was worse, so she asked Nian to apologize to the naughty brat first. Unexpectedly, after Nian heard this, she immediately frowned and replied stubbornly, "I won't. He's a pervert. I don't want to apologize to a pervert." Perhaps it was because the movie Su Yuan had left a very serious psychological shadow on Qin Shi, so he had always been very concerned about the issue of indecency. Actually, to put it more bluntly, the naughty brat's behavior was indecent. Age wasn't a reason to make a mistake, nor was it an excuse to avoid making a mistake. Scourges were cultivated slowly. If a mistake was made and a random excuse was found to cover it up, there would obviously be more girls who would be unlucky in the future. "Why did you not teach your child well, but my child was the one who was hurt?" This was a matter of principle. Therefore, Qin Shi's attitude had always been absolutely unforgivable, absolutely unforgiving. Nian had obviously inherited Qin Shi's teachings. Therefore, when she heard that the teacher actually asked her to apologize to the naughty brat, Nian suddenly became confused. "Pervert. Shameless. I'm not going to apologize to a pervert." Bah. The little girl's reaction was somewhat out of the teacher's expectations. She called him a pervert here and there, and the last "bah" deeply hurt the naughty brat who was lying on the ground pretending to be innocent. This was great. Seeing that the whole class was watching the show, the naughty brat who had to bear the name of pervert suddenly felt a little embarrassed. After all, he was still a child. The teacher was busy correcting Nian's mistake, so she didn't notice the naughty brat's thoughts. When the naughty brat saw that everyone seemed to be laughing at him, his mentality instantly exploded. After a loud cry, he ran out of the classroom while crying. Well, this time he was really crying. Seeing this, the teacher quickly chased after him. But this naughty brat ran like a thief, and in a flash he jumped into the multimedia classroom next door. The parents were having a meeting in the multimedia classroom, and this tragic cry immediately attracted everyone's attention. While everyone was still wondering what was going on outside, a rather good-looking young woman directly rushed out of the classroom. Nonsense, as a mother, how could she not know whose child was crying? As expected. As soon as the beautiful young woman went out, she saw the naughty brat who was covering his face and running wildly. Yang, come here, mommy is here." "What's wrong? Who bullied you?" "Don't cry, tell mommy, mommy will help you." After seeing his mother, not only did the naughty brat not stop crying, but he also cried even more heartbreakingly. The naughty brat's cries echoed in the corridor classroom, as one could imagine how wronged he must have been. Fortunately, the school didn't officially start today, and in such a big school, there were only freshmen like them, or else where would the school put its face? The parent-teacher conference was forced to be suspended. The principal walked out of the multimedia classroom with a gloomy face. A group of head teachers and head teachers followed behind the principal expressionlessly, but in their hearts, they had already started cursing. Which class was this child from? Was the teacher who took care of this child an idiot? Didn't he know that today was the registration day? The principal had just introduced the school's teaching staff and teaching atmosphere to the parents, but in the end the other side slapped their faces. The head teachers of each class silently prayed in their hearts, only hoping that this unlucky child was not from their class. The principal, teachers, parents. A group of people walked out of the multimedia classroom in such a grandiose manner. When the head teacher of Year 1 Class 2 realized that this naughty brat was actually from Year 1 Class 2, she fell silent. The head teachers of the other classes suddenly had a very strange expression on their faces. Hee hee, there was a good show to watch. Please remember the domain name of this book. .com. Wonderful book mobile version website. .com. Chapter 431. The naughty child cried until the sky darkened. No matter what the parents asked him, he just pointed at the classroom and kept sobbing. Looking at his pitiful appearance, those who didn't know would think that he had been wronged. It was normal for first graders to cry. It shouldn't have caused such a big commotion. Unfortunately, the child's mother wasn't someone to be trifled with. The teacher who rushed out tried to calm the situation, but the beautiful young woman didn't listen to her at all. Seeing that the child couldn't stop crying, the young woman took her son directly to the door of the multimedia classroom. Then she squatted at the door and slowly coaxed her son. From the beginning to the end, she didn't say a word to the teacher. Instead, she silently comforted her son. And this was actually the highest level of a shrew. She didn't make a fuss, she didn't hang herself, she just looked on coldly and laughed. She didn't even do anything hysterical or embarrassing. She just silently stood at the door with the child. At that moment, all the teachers present, including the principal, couldn't help but feel a little scared. They instantly understood that today's matter might not be easy to resolve. The naughty child's crying interrupted the meeting, and at the same time, it caused a burst of discussion among the parents. The young woman didn't do anything extreme, and the school couldn't forcibly take the crying child away. Therefore, seeing that the head of the year department couldn't communicate with her, the principal could only temporarily stop the meeting. He personally promised the young woman that he would give her a satisfactory explanation after he found out the reason. After the young woman heard the principal's promise, she whispered a few words in the naughty child's ear. It was strange. The naughty child who couldn't be coaxed heard his mother's words, and his originally tragic cries suddenly became sobbing. Is this an Oscar-winning actor? Seeing this, the teachers couldn't help but silently complain in their hearts. Everyone was an adult, so how could they not understand the twists and turns in the story? This woman knew how to use the rules, and at the same time she understood the principle of the weak defeating the strong. It was obvious how angry the principal was to be involved in such a mess on the first day of school. Therefore, after the principal gave the task of presiding over the meeting to the head of the year department, he quickly walked out of the multimedia classroom with the class teachers. When the parents saw this, they ignored the age director's advice and hurriedly followed the principal out of the multimedia classroom. After confirming that the troublemaker wasn't their child, the parents returned to their seats and discussed the aftermath of the incident. It's so hard to get a place in the capital-affiliated primary school. Looks like there aren't any left. I wonder whose unlucky child this is. Won't father and mother be angered to death this time? After all, today was not even the first day of school. It was just a reporting day, but it turned out to be such a big deal. If nothing unexpected happened, this child who hit someone would probably be treated as an example and expelled directly by the school. Of course, according to the rules of the 9-year compulsory education, schools could not directly expel or dissuade students. But the school could give the students holidays. Other than making things difficult for them, the school had many other ways to make students transfer schools voluntarily. Moreover, today was only the registration day, and the information had not yet been submitted for review. The principal could delete the child's information at any time. Perhaps it was out of sympathy for the loss of a rabbit, but the group of parents immediately decided to repeatedly educate their children in the future. They must not make any mistakes and be expelled from school. Back to the principal. After the group of people arrived at the door of Year 1 Class 2's classroom, they did not directly enter the classroom. Instead, they asked the teacher to go in and call out the troublemaker. Nian Nian obediently followed the teacher out of the classroom. As soon as they stepped out of the door, the naughty child who had been crying non-stop looked as if he had seen his father's murderer. He immediately pointed at Nian Nian and shouted excitedly, "Mother, it's her. She's the one who hit me. Here. It hurts." After saying that, the naughty child raised his head and signaled his mother to see the palm print on his face. He was a child after all, and his skin was very delicate. Although Nian did not use much strength, this slap was still solid and left a faint mark on his face. The young woman saw the palm print on the child's face, but she did not do anything. Instead, she silently looked at the principal. In this case, the principal naturally had to understand the situation first. Therefore, the teacher immediately went forward to explain. This was the capital's affiliated primary school, and all the children were enrolling on the first day. Naturally, the teacher could not be biased. Therefore, when the principal heard the whole story, he immediately agreed with the way the teacher handled it. The teacher did not do anything wrong. If it were any other school or any other teacher facing this situation, they would have done the same. It was wrong to lift the skirt, but it was even more wrong to hit someone. Therefore, there was nothing wrong with the judgment that the person who hit someone should apologize first, and the troublemaker should apologize later. But the problem now was, Nian was like a tortoise who ate a scale today. No matter how the teacher communicated with her, she was determined not to admit that she was wrong. And children, in addition to being particularly prone to crying, actually had another characteristic, and that was, they were especially stubborn. They were even more stubborn than adults. Standing in front of her was the principal, the young woman holding the naughty child's hand, and the teacher in charge of each class. The teacher said one after another to guide the little fellow. As long as she apologized, the principal obviously would not make things difficult for this 6-year-old child. But unfortunately, Nian did not apologize. She even said in front of the principal that she was determined not to apologize again. "I'm not apologizing. I'm not wrong. The person who lifted my skirt is a pervert. I'm not apologizing to a pervert." Even though she was surrounded in the middle, she did not show any fear on her face. In fact, it was not just the principal who came today. Even if God came, he would not be able to change her mind. Because this was a matter of principle that she had repeatedly emphasized to her. Time had smoothed out our edges and corners, and time had eroded our hearts. The 6-year-old Chen had not learned to be flexible. Therefore, her father's words were the truth sword in her hand, and also her stubbornness. Even if the whole world said that you were wrong, it was okay, her father was here. Seeing that the little fellow was still unwilling to admit her mistake, the principal could only sigh deeply in the end. Then he turned to the teacher and asked, "Where are the child's parents? Didn't they come out with us?" Hearing this, the teachers could not help but look at each other. They suddenly knew that things were not good. As expected. Seeing that the little fellow's parents did not appear, the principal directly said to the teacher in charge of Year 1 Class 2, "Inform her parents, this kind of child, our school can't educate her. Didn't I write it wrong before? So, I'll write it according to my idea. What I want to write is about Nian's growth. So, I hope you understand, under the protection of an eagle will never grow up. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website." Chapter 432. This kind of child, our school can't educate her. Wasn't the meaning of this sentence clear enough? The principal was trying to dissuade the little girl. Although she was only a 6-year-old child, Nian's actions today had already crossed the line. And the worst thing was, no matter how the teacher tried to guide her, Nian was determined not to admit that she was wrong. Under these circumstances, even if the principal wanted to give her a chance to repent, he couldn't find a suitable reason to do so. After all, today was only the first day of school and not the usual day of classes. If she really entered the school with this stubborn and violent temper of hers, who knew what kind of trouble she would cause in the future? This was a primary school affiliated to the capital, and at the same time, it was also the top public primary school in the country. He couldn't allow a single rat to spoil the entire pot of soup. The principal repeatedly deliberated for a long time. In the end, he made this seemingly unreasonable decision. Of course, the principal was actually very clear in his heart. For a 6-year-old child, her worldview had yet to be stabilized, so the child's every action was actually carried out according to the daily teachings of the parents. Rather than saying that it was the child's fault, it was more accurate to say that it was the parents' fault, but in the end, the child was the one to take the blame. Nian happened to bump into the muzzle of the gun, and because of this, she became the target of the principal's punishment. At this moment, no teacher spoke up to plead for her, and even the homeroom teacher of Year 1 Class 2 was silent. Seeing this, the young woman couldn't help but reveal a trace of satisfaction on her face. She gently touched the naughty child's face as if hinting to her son, Look, mother is standing up for you. Seeing that the principal had spoken, the homeroom teacher could only sigh deeply, then turned around and walked to the multimedia classroom, preparing to inform Qin Yan's parents to take the child away. But just as she was about to turn around, Qin Yongyan, who hadn't shown his face all this time, suddenly appeared behind her. Qin Yongyan had already stepped into the diviner realm. Although this level of cultivation couldn't achieve eternal youth, they could still maintain their appearance for decades. In order to not appear too different, Qin Yongyan deliberately made himself look a lot older, thus giving the impression that he was about 40 or 50 years old. With his cultivation level, he naturally knew what was going on outside. Therefore, as soon as he appeared, Qin Yongyan directly walked past the head teacher and came to the little girl. "Yan, come. Grandpa will take you home." He gently held the little fellow in his arms, and with a little force, the little fellow was lifted up by him. At this moment, the right or wrong of this matter was no longer important. Qin Yongyan respected Qin Shi's teaching methods, so as long as Nyenyen believed that she was not wrong, then she really was not wrong. The one who was wrong was the brat and that beautiful woman. At the same time, it was also the school's education method. Isn't it just a small school affiliated to the capital? What's the big deal? Was this the only school in Wuxia? It's okay, Grandpa will change the school for you. Qin Yongyan didn't even bother to greet the principal. Under the gaze of all the teachers, he carried the little fellow and walked straight to the school gate. The little fellow silently lay in Qin Yongyan's arms. After Qin Yongyan carried her out of the school gate, she couldn't help but look back at the school that had driven her away on her first day. In fact, she felt very wronged. But she didn't cry from beginning to end. Because her father once said, "You can't cry when you're wronged. If you cry, it means you've lost." There's a group of people waiting to see you make a fool of yourself, especially those who have wronged you. The more wronged and sad you are, the happier and more complacent they will be. Qin Yongyan wasn't Qin Shi, so he didn't want to lower himself to the level of these ordinary people. The only solution he could think of was to change the school and environment for Nyenyen. Therefore, after walking out of the school gate, Qin Yongyan took out his phone and called Wang Chuanju. Wang Chuanju was presiding over a department meeting, so she wouldn't have answered the phone. But she remembered that Qin Yongyan was an antique who didn't even use a cell phone. Something important must have happened if he suddenly called. Therefore, Wang Chuanju immediately stopped the meeting and walked out of the conference room with her phone. Ah. What? Transfer Nyenyen? The capital-affiliated primary school is close to home and the quality of education is good. Why would she want to transfer schools? Wang Chuanju felt that Qin Yongyan's request was very strange, so she repeatedly asked over the phone. Qin Yongyan didn't want to say at first, but he couldn't stand her bombardment of questions, so he had to roughly explain the situation. But unexpectedly, after hearing the story, Wang Chuanju exploded on the spot. Even though they were separated by a door, her roar could be heard clearly in the conference room. What? Nyenyen was expelled? Who did it? Don't go, I'll be right there. What do you mean I don't care? My granddaughter was bullied and you want me to do nothing? Brother, I don't want to criticize you, but you really need to change your good temper. It's a good thing that Qin Shi isn't at home now. Otherwise, with his daughter's temper, wouldn't he tear down the school today? Okay, don't say any more, I'll be right there. It had to be said that Wang Chuanju was really efficient. In the time it took Qin Yongyan and the little girl to wait for the bus, she had already rushed over with a group of people. As soon as they got off the bus, Wang Chuanju directly squatted in front of the little girl, then gently hugged her into her arms and patiently asked, "Nyenyen, tell Grandma what's going on today?" Perhaps it was because Wang Chuanju was a woman. When the little girl saw her, she immediately pouted and said coquettishly, "Dad said that I'll hit whoever lifts my skirt. But the teacher said that I did something wrong and wanted me to apologize to him." Speaking of this, the little girl suddenly paused and for the first time an expression of grievance and sadness appeared on her face. In fact, when everyone said that she was wrong, how could she not have doubted her own actions? After all, she was not some stubborn brat. Although Grandpa said that she did nothing wrong, the little girl still seemed to have some self-doubt, so she could not help but ask doubtfully, "Grandma, was I really wrong?" The so-called right and wrong itself was a subjective meaning. Perhaps as long as Wang Chuanju said that she was wrong, the little girl would immediately change her mind and take the initiative to apologize to the brat. She was very sensible. And it was precisely because she was sensible that she would not be easily persuaded by outsiders. Qin Yongyan was not an outsider, and Wang Chuanju was not an outsider either. So as long as one of them said that she was wrong, the little girl would seriously reflect on it. Fortunately, Wang Chuanju did not give her a chance to reflect, but directly carried her up and strode towards the school gate. What wrong? Your grandpa has a soft temper, likes to settle everything peacefully, and is not easily calculative with others. Because of this character, he used to be bullied in the village, so don't learn from him. If you want to learn from your father. Didn't your father often say this? We don't cause trouble, but we're not afraid of trouble either. Whether it's at school or elsewhere, in short, if you fall behind, you'll be beaten, if you're weak, you'll be bullied. So Nian, you must remember, in the future if anyone dares to lift your skirt, you'll beat him hard for me. Because not only did your father say this, but your grandma also said this. With Wang Chuanju's encouragement, the doubts in the little girl's heart suddenly disappeared, and a smile finally appeared on her face again. Looking at the valiant and high-spirited Wang Chuanju striding into the school gate, Qin Yongyan could only helplessly shake his head at the side. No wonder Qin Xueqing's character was so tough. Wasn't it all because of Wang Chuanju's teaching? The two sisters of the Qin family, Ruo Ying and Lin Qing. One was gentle like water. One was as strong as fire. Who knew? Who would Nian look more like when she grew up? Please remember the domain name of the book. 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. Chapter 433. With Wang Chuanju's strong appearance, there was a shocking turn of events. When the principal saw her take out a black ID, he immediately squeezed out a sincere smile on his face. It couldn't be helped. This was the world of adults. Their edges and corners had been smoothed out by time, and the corners of their mouths were raised into sophisticated smiles. Wang Chuanju was really too strong. No one knew what she said to the principal, but in a short while Nian was led back to the classroom by the class teacher with a smile. Children didn't hold grudges, but when the naughty child saw Nian return to her seat as if nothing had happened, he couldn't help but have a flash of fear on his face. It was obvious that the naughty child was really afraid of this new classmate who beat him up at the slightest disagreement. Nian was still young, so she didn't understand what Wang Chuanju's appearance meant. But the beautiful young woman was very clear that she might have kicked an iron plate today. So when she came out of the principal's office, she hurriedly left the school with the naughty child, as if she didn't want to stay here any longer. As Nian returned to her seat, this farce also came to an end. Other than the naughty child being taken away by his mother, it was as if nothing had happened. And Nian, the freshman who dared to beat someone on the first day of registration, became famous because of this battle. Now, not only did the teachers in the school know that her background wasn't ordinary, even the students looked at her differently when they looked at her. After all, in a class there were also class bullies other than top students. Fame was earned through fighting. The teachers didn't talk about what happened today, and the children were afraid that they would be the next to be beaten. So from today onwards, Nian was already firmly sitting on the throne of Year 1 Class 2. The teachers of each class took the students to tour the school and let the children familiarize themselves with the school environment. After that, the whole process of registration was over. The little guy was confused the whole day. After dinner, when she made a video call to Qin Shi, she told her father about it. She didn't expect that after Qin Shi heard about it, he repeatedly told her not to hit anyone in the future. As the saying goes, no one knows a son better than his father. Who doesn't know a father better than a son? Children were the closest people to their parents. How could they not be aware of the changes in their parents? Qin Shi's previous education had long been deeply ingrained in Nian's mind, so when he suddenly proposed a completely different education concept at this moment, the little fellow immediately felt a little strange. Because these words were obviously in conflict with what Qin Shi had said before, and it was also completely different from what Grandma had said. Looking at the lifelike Qin Shi in the video, the little girl was at a loss. It was as if an error had occurred when a computer was running. The little guy's brain shut down. The child psychologist did not know the real Qin Shi, so he could only guide the little guy in the correct way. But no matter how perfect the imitation was, a fake would always be a fake. Therefore, this seemingly small oversight planted a seed of doubt in the little fellow's heart. Perhaps she wouldn't be able to detect any abnormalities in the short term. But if time passed, by the time the little fellow turned into a little girl, this clumsy lie would probably burst like a bubble. Fortunately, the little fellow was still young. Even if she felt a little strange, she didn't directly question it over the phone. As usual, Qin Shi comforted the little fellow, told her a few stories and coaxed her to sleep. The little fellow nodded. But after hanging up the phone, she didn't seem to be sleepy at all. She turned over and directly leaned against Qin Ruoying. She still felt a little confused, so she leaned her head on her mother's shoulder and told her what she saw and heard today. Unfortunately, her mother was still sleeping quietly. The little fellow blinked and suddenly felt a little cold, so she softly called in the dark, "Big cat." Meow. After hearing her call, the big cat immediately jumped down from the beam and directly got into the little fellow's bed with a few leaps. Feeling the warmth from the big cat, the little guy blinked his eyes and turned to look at the window at the side. Tonight, the moonlight was like water. The moonlight shone through the window on the bedside. The little fellow hugged the big cat tightly and clung to Qin Ruoying. She couldn't help but murmur, "Big cat, where do you think Dad is going? Meow, when will he come back? Meow, I miss him so much." Perhaps he felt the strong longing in his daughter's heart. She suddenly woke up from his meditation. Perhaps because he had been meditating for too long this time, the moment he woke up, she even had the illusion that he was in a courtyard. But then, the endless darkness in front of him made him recognize the reality. She was still floating in the darkness. Looking at the timer beside him, he found that he had been meditating for as long as 200 years. There was no 60-year cycle in the mountains and no one knew the year after the winter. Last time, she was imprisoned for 200 years. When his life was in danger, a light door appeared to save him. Now, another 200 years had passed, and the light door still hadn't appeared. In this regard, she didn't panic at all. In fact, he had already guessed that the light door might be related to the mysterious woman. If he counted the time on Dragon Head Peak, the mysterious woman had actually saved him twice. Because the difference in their realms was too great, she could only silently remember the woman's life-saving grace and didn't think about how to repay her. She watched the woman being dragged away by the chains. Naturally, he couldn't pin his hopes on the mysterious woman to escape. This time he could only rely on himself. The way to escape was actually very simple. He just needed to enter the void realm. After 200 years of meditation, she was very sure that this dark space was actually not different from the big world. Both were small planes in the cracks of the void. It was just that the big world had been transformed by the grand pure divine ancestor, so it became a paradise that protected the ancient cultivators. Thinking of this, she looked around the void. After getting up and stretching his body, he sat down again with his legs crossed. These 200 years were not in vain. He kept thinking about the true meaning of the word void in his mind and successfully found a clue. She had already understood it, but because of the lack of clinical trials, he couldn't break through to the void realm. The tortoise breathing secret technique allowed him to retain abundant true yuan, so she now only needed to turn the deduction in his mind into reality. Void realm. Seeing through the void, training the spirit to return to the void. And this was the third level that cultivators had to step on. Please remember the domain name of the book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor mobile version of reading website. Chapter 434. After 200 years of pondering and deliberating, she finally grasped the true meaning of the word void that his master once mentioned. What is void? It is the void and also the void. Seeing through the void and encompassing all things. Even if you haven't eaten pork, have you not seen a pig run? She had long known the main characteristics of Dongshu stage cultivators. They can freely travel through the universe, make sumaru mustard bags, and even open up their own small plane in the void. Apart from that, the biggest characteristic of Dongshu stage cultivators is that they are full of energy. Dongshu stage cultivators have reached the peak of their ability to sense and use the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Therefore, even if they don't actively guide it, they can easily influence the spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby. Therefore, when Dongshu stage cultivators fight, any technique they use will be much more powerful than before. More importantly, as long as there is spiritual energy of heaven and earth nearby, Dongshu stage cultivators will never face the predicament of being exhausted. Because the speed at which they breathe in and out spiritual energy is far more than the consumption of their techniques. Therefore, in theory, Dongshu stage cultivators will have the absolute advantage even if they are surrounded by countless Yuanying stage cultivators. If we use gaming terms to describe it, it would be, Yuanying stage cultivators can't even break through the defense, how can they hurt Dongshu stage cultivators? Of course, the above is all that she can see. The significance of Dongshu stage is much more than that. Maybe the mysterious woman left too deep an impression on Qin, so after ending the tortoise-like state, Qin can no longer calm down. He can't help but think about the process of the woman's appearance. In a trance. She suddenly understands why he can't see the woman's face or hear her voice. That's because the woman is not in the same plane as him. Everything that she had seen before was merely a projection of the woman through countless small planes using her supreme magic power to appear in front of him. From the beginning to the end, the woman never really came to the dark space he was in. As for the terrifying aura that came after, she has reason to suspect. The Great Terror was actually trying to find out the true reason why the woman projected herself into this world. However, the woman had used some unknown method to prevent the Great Terror from discovering his existence. That was how she managed to survive. The two mysterious experts flashed past Shi's eyes like comets, but they left an extremely deep impression on him. She kept thinking about everything related to the mysterious woman. Purple flames and azure lightning. The mysterious woman had 9 chains. The Great Terror in the depths of the void, as well as his 200 years of contemplation and contemplation. All sorts of seemingly unrelated events converged together. Suddenly, she understood. It was like playing the ice bucket challenge in the middle of winter. When a basin of ice water was poured over his head, he suddenly felt enlightened. The word void was too mysterious. It could be understood as both the void and nothingness. The former meant space while the latter meant matter. In the dark space, there was only space and no matter. The only matter was himself. Just like the Sumeru mustard seed bag, this dark space seemed endless, but in fact it couldn't be any smaller. Since she was in the dark space, then he was part of the space, so the space was infinitely large for him. But if he jumped out of the space and looked back at this dark space, how big could it be? It might be as big as the sun or as small as a speck of dust. But all of this, what did it have to do with him? He was no longer a reference object in it, but an observer outside of it. The sun might be big, but as long as he flew out of the solar system, the sun would become a tiny star. Everything was relative. Nothingness and the void. Space and matter. They seemed unrelated, but they were closely related. And this was obviously the so-called true meaning of the word void. She understood the key, so what he had to do next was to put his thoughts into practice. So he closed his eyes again. This time there were no more distracting thoughts in his mind. Understanding and breaking through are two different things. So when she opened his eyes again, another 100 years had passed. A full 300 years. She had finally endured until this moment. Therefore, the moment he opened his eyes, the surging true essence suddenly surged out of his body, and then spread out in circles. But then, the true essence was like tentacles and was all pulled back by Shi. He was looking for the law threads left behind by the mysterious woman. When people walked through the snow, they would leave a trail of footprints on the snow. Although Shi understood the true meaning of the word void, but because there was no spiritual energy in this place, he had not truly broken through to the Dongshu stage. Right now, he could not use his own strength to forcefully break through the void, so he needed to find the door of light that the woman opened for him. The snow melted. The door of light also disappeared. But the law threads that connected the two worlds still existed. Unless the woman personally destroyed it, this thread would forever exist between the two worlds. And this is the first law of heaven and earth that a cultivator must grasp, and also the biggest difference between the Dongshu stage and the ascended stage. One end is connected to the world, the other end is connected to the dark space. She could only find this law thread at the moment, because he had once used this law thread to travel between the two worlds. Maybe, when he breaks through again in the future, he will suddenly realize, even in this empty dark space, there were countless densely packed law threads. Every single one of them led to a different place. Shi still could not open a new law thread by himself, so he could only rely on the woman's power. He searched and searched and searched. Finally, he found it. To Shi, this thread could not be any thinner. If he did not understand the true meaning of the word void, he would not be able to sense the existence of this thread in his life. Of course, the so-called thread was just a concept. It actually refers to a cultivator's understanding of the law of heaven and earth. This was the first time Shi came into contact with the law of heaven and earth. Thus, the moment he discovered this law thread, he was so excited that he started to tremble. Shi could no longer suppress his excitement, and immediately reached out to touch the thread. The moment his finger touched the law thread, a golden light shone. The spirit energy from the world kept pouring out from the golden light. A smile that had not appeared in a long time appeared on Shi's face. After that, he did not stay any longer, and directly turned into a ray of light and entered the golden light. The world. I'm back. Please remember the domain name of this book, .com. the mobile version of the book.com. Chapter 435. Unlike the previous time, Qin Shi used his own ability to traverse through the two realms. After he flew out of the golden light, he naturally had a deeper understanding of the law threads. Qin Shi looked up and saw the same towering trees and lush vegetation on the floating island. The great sun-moon star array dispelled the darkness and brought light to the large world. Everything in front of him was the same as the last time he was here. There seemed to be no changes. But after Qin Shi looked around the floating island, he suddenly realized that the great sun-moon star array in the sky, which seemed to only be used for illumination, faintly contained strange patterns that even he could not understand. After realizing that something was wrong, Qin Shi was not in a hurry to find Yuhuan Tianzuan to settle the score. Instead, he sat cross-legged on the ground and looked up at the sky with a serious expression on his face as he observed. The last time he was here, he had not comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he did not feel that there was anything special about this array. Now that he had comprehended the true meaning of the word void, and had even come into contact with the first law of heaven and earth, after careful observation, Qin Shi suddenly realized that these patterns were not the array patterns that maintained the operation of the array, but a law thread that he had never come into contact with before. The sun-moon star array rotated in unison. 9 stars flew in the sky, 9 palaces in the sky. Qin Shi looked at the bottom of the floating island thoughtfully. When he saw that the bottom of the floating island was still covered with stars, he suddenly had a guess. This array was not only used for illumination. That was because other than the many law threads above the floating island that guided the movement of the stars, there were also many law threads below the floating island that seemed to be there but not there. They were silent in the void, like a huge net hanging below the floating island group. If the 120,000 floating islands were considered as a whole, then this array was like 2 huge nets, firmly sandwiching the islands in between. One net had the sun-moon star array hanging on it, called Heaven's Net. The other net was deposited in the void, called Earth's Net. After understanding the mystery, Qin Shi guessed. This formation might be the final trump card left by the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor for Tiandu. Once Tiandu faced a life and death crisis, the formation could instantly turn into a murderous formation and wipe out all enemies for Tiandu. Oh, it seems to be very powerful? After confirming the dangers of the Great Formation, Qin Shi was still in no hurry to kill his way to Dragon Head Peak. Instead, he randomly grabbed an unlucky fellow on the floating island. Just like the last time, he had a time frame of reference this time, so he quickly found out from the mouth of this unlucky guy, it had only been a month since the battle on Dragon Head Peak. In other words, although Qin Shi had been in the dark space for 300 years, only a month had passed in the great world. If the previous 200 years were to be included, then from the time he opened the gate of heaven until now, a total of less than 2 months had passed. If Tiandu time was converted to Earth time, it should be about 16 months. December of 1 year. 1 year and 1 April. Nian was already more than 6 years old. Without him and Ying to accompany her this year, he didn't know if this child's birthday was happy. Thinking of this, Qin Shi's longing for her suddenly overflowed like the Yellow River, uncontrollable. So, he didn't delay any longer. After casually knocking that unlucky fellow unconscious and throwing him to the side, Qin Shi directly sat cross-legged in the air. As he entered a meditative state, the spirit chi of heaven and earth within a radius of 1,000 miles suddenly surged toward him like a tsunami. Under Qin Shi's intentional guidance, the spirit chi of heaven and earth suddenly gathered in one place, almost turning into an almost translucent, huge funnel visible to the naked eye. The violent surge of spirit chi set off a huge storm. The storm spread in all directions, instantly causing several large floating islands in the vicinity to tremble. Rumbling noises kept ringing out. The nearby floating islands seemed to have experienced an earthquake. Not only were the residents on the islands terrified, but even the birds and beasts on the islands were so frightened that they scattered and roared. The spirit chi funnel grew larger and larger, and in a short while, it covered all the floating islands within a radius of 100 miles. And the spirit chi on the floating islands covered by the funnel all rushed toward Bicker. The direction of the bickering was exactly where Qin Shi was. He was using his own strength, draining the dragon veins of hundreds of floating islands. When the spirit chi of heaven and earth entered the body, there should be a refining process. However, Qin Shi was like a large factory at this moment. As long as the spirit chi entered his body, after a few assembly lines of processing, it would completely become a part of his body. The spirit chi surged faster and faster, and the accumulation of vital essence also increased. Qin Shi didn't hide his aura at all, so his aura was rising at a speed visible to the naked eye. The early stage of the soul formation realm, the middle stage, the late stage, and then the peak stage. Under such crazy pressure, in just a few breaths' time, the accumulation of vital essence in Qin Shi's body had already reached the peak. And as the funnel continued to expand, Qin Shi's aura also became stronger and stronger. In the face of such a powerful aura, the residents on the nearest islands couldn't even stand steadily. At this moment, he didn't hide the killing intent in his heart. This killing intent seemed to have substance, and in the end, it turned into an invisible long sword. It soared into the sky and cut through the clouds. The sword pointed to the dragon head peak. Bang! 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 Hundreds of dragon drums sounded at the same time, and the dense drum sounds poured down like a rainstorm. At that moment, even the god generals on duty on the various islands were stunned. But then, they were like cats whose tails had been stepped on, and they couldn't help but let out a long cry. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Enemy attack! In an instant, everyone was in a panic and the sky shook. Yuhuan Qianzuan was discussing something with the celestial venerables in the Emperor Hall. When they suddenly heard the warning of the 5 divine generals, a trace of surprise flashed across the faces of the celestial venerables. Since they were called the celestial venerables of the 10 directions, there were naturally 10 celestial venerables in Tiandu. Qin Shi was lucky last time and just happened to arrive at Dragon Head Peak when the other celestial venerables were patrolling, so he only met the 3 celestial venerables, Yuhuan, Miao Fa and Xianzhen. But today was different. With Yuhuan Tianzuan as the leader, Yujiang, Taihua, Yinghua and the other celestial venerables were all present at this moment. Therefore, after hearing the divine general's warning, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face darkened on the spot. It must be him. He was lucky enough to escape last time, and now he dares to come back? Does he really think there's no one in Tiandu? Before he finished speaking, Yuhuan Tianzuan summoned the jade Huan glazed cup, and then suddenly turned into a ray of light, rushing towards the direction of the dragon drum. Seeing this, the 7 celestial venerables who had not experienced the battle on Dragon Head Peak couldn't help but look at each other in dismay. Was there a need to be so excited? Chapter 436. Other than Yu Huan, Miao Fa and Xianzhen, the other celestial venerables had never personally fought with Qin Shi, so their understanding of Qin Shi came from the battle recordings on the Shantian mirror. The 7 celestial venerables were very knowledgeable, so it was not difficult to discover through the battle recordings. Although Qin Shi seemed ferocious at that time, using his own strength to forcefully deal with the siege of 3 Empyreans, during the fight, he had been in a passive state the entire time, basically without any extra strength to fight back. The 3 celestial venerables almost took away half of Qin Shi's life, not to mention the 10 celestial venerables present. Therefore, after seeing Yuhuan Qianzuan so excited, the 7 celestial venerables could not help but feel a little puzzled. Looking at Yuhuan's aggressive manner, could it be that he had some personal grudge with that person? The 7 celestial venerables each had their own thoughts. As they pondered over the key points, they followed Miao Fa and Xianzhen to the direction of the dragon drum. The 10 celestial venerables going out to meet the enemy was a grand occasion in divine capital. They did not say that they were not allowed to watch the battle. Therefore, the spectators could no longer suppress the excitement in their hearts. As long as they could fly, they followed the footsteps of the 10 celestial venerables and rushed toward Qin Shi's location like a swarm of bees. For a moment, as long as the celestial venerables passed by the floating island, it was like a hornet's nest that was lit by a fire. In an instant, countless celestial venerables and above flew out. It had been a long time since the great world was so lively. Densely packed silhouettes continuously flew across the sky above the floating island like a swarm of locusts. The scene was even more shocking than the final battle in the movie Avatar. It had to be said that this troublemaker not only had a high cultivation, but also had courage that far surpassed ordinary people. As the saying goes, where there is life there is hope. As long as one's cultivation reached the golden core stage and above, one's life was more important than anything else. The cultivation of immortal cultivators was not easy to come by, so how could they so easily give it up for nothing? What was the difference between Qin Shi's current actions and courting death? In order to fight back, he sacrificed his life for nothing. How unwise was such an action? Many people could not help but feel sorry for Qin Shi from the bottom of their hearts. However, even more people were filled with excitement, hoping to witness the fall of a heavenly venerate with their own eyes. With Yuhuan Tianzuan in the lead, the immortal cultivators of the great world quickly arrived at the periphery of the floating islands. The funnel that looked like a canopy of clouds had now turned into a gigantic cloud vortex, enveloping almost all of the floating islands within 1,000 miles. As the heaven and earth spirit chi continuously flowed into the center of the funnel, the floating island enveloped by the funnel gradually lost its vitality. At this very moment, the cloud vortex above the floating islands was like a ferocious beast from ancient times. Apart from sucking dry all the dragon veins on the floating islands, it also cast a huge psychological shadow on the islanders. This mysterious man who dared to make an enemy of Tiandu had yet to show himself, but the invisible pressure coming from his body weighed down on everyone's hearts like a huge rock. A sense of despair gradually spread through the crowd. It was only after Yuhuan Tianzuan's roar that this huge rock finally fell. Arrogant thief. There's a path to heaven but you don't want to take it. There's no door to hell, but you insist on coming. Generals of Tiandu, listen to my order. Follow me and set up the soul-capturing formation. This time we must not let him escape. Yuhuan Tianzuan took the lead and led the 5 divine generals into the cloud vortex like a sharp arrow. His appearance was like a ray of light in the darkness, instantly clearing away the haze in everyone's hearts. The islanders raised their heads to look, and they could not help but reveal an excited expression as if they had just escaped death. In the end, Yuhuan Tianzuan was their spiritual leader. Unlike last time, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not care about his face this time and forced himself to fight Qin Shi one-on-one. Instead he assumed a group fighting stance. However, when he rushed into the clouds he suddenly realized that Qin Shi's aura seemed to be much stronger than last time. Thinking of this, Yuhuan Tianzuan's face could not help but flash a trace of surprise, and a sense of uneasiness arose in his heart. However, when Miaofa and Xianzhen arrived, this feeling of uneasiness was thrown out of his mind in the blink of an eye. He was just a defeated opponent. Could it be that he could pierce through the sky today? For safety reasons, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not recklessly rush in alone. He was afraid of falling into Qin Shi's ambush, so he immediately said to Miaofa and Xianzhen, "This person's behavior today is really strange. I'm afraid it's a trap. The two of you follow me to find out what's going on." Hearing this, Miaofa and Xianzhen immediately nodded, then summoned their magic weapons and rushed into the depths of the clouds with Yuhuan Tianzuan side by side. At the same time, Qin Shi, who was in the center of the vortex, slowly opened his eyes. As soon as he opened his eyes, the vortex formed by the spiritual energy above him began to rotate rapidly, and then poured down on him at a speed visible to the naked eye. There was no grand and unique scene of a breakthrough. When the vital essence in Qin Shi's body accumulated to a certain level, he who had mastered the true meaning of the word void, naturally broke through to the divine transformation stage, and then directly stepped into the Dongshu stage. The moment Qin Shi stepped into the Dongshu stage, a faint golden light suddenly lit up on his eyebrows. From afar, it was a bit like when Erlang Shin opened his heavenly eye in the TV series. Then this golden light gradually converged between Qin Shi's eyebrows, and then completely disappeared. This was the first law of heaven and earth that he had mastered, also known as the divine mark. Once the divine mark appeared, the Dongshu stage would appear. Qin Shi deliberately restrained his aura, so Yuhuan Tianzuan did not notice anything strange. When enemies meet, naturally their eyes would be exceptionally red. Even though they were still far away, the two sides did not even say a word. As the saying goes, my brother Long is ruthless and doesn't talk much. The moment he saw Qin Shi, Yuhuan Tianzuan viciously threw the jade-glazed cup in his hand at him. It was still the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. Seeing this, Qin Shi did not even condense the divine sword Dharma power. He directly formed a sword with his fingers, and then slashed at the 3 lanterns. It was still the first move of the moonlight sword technique. But after this sword slash, it instantly sucked away the little remaining spiritual chi in the surroundings, causing a strange vacuum to appear where the sword slash passed. This was the difference between the divine transformation stage and the Dongshu stage. If the divine transformation stage was compared to nitroglycerin, then the Dongshu stage was obviously nuclear fusion. There was a fundamental difference between the two. Therefore, the moment Qin Shi's sword slash hit the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man, an explosion that was beyond everyone's imagination occurred. With a loud boom, the 3 lanterns were sent flying back. The 3 heavenly lords who were closely related to the 3 lanterns seemed to have been severely injured, and a strange flush appeared on their faces. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version website. Chapter 437. Above the floating islands. The huge cloud vortex obscured everyone's vision. They did not dare to approach the vortex, so they quietly floated around it. Looking up, the densely packed figures were like a swarm of locusts, almost covering half the sky. Just like the audience in the Colosseum in Rome, these descendants of ancient cultivators did not dare to make any noise, but there was still an inexplicable fanaticism in their eyes. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of a heavenly venerable with their own eyes. But no one expected that in addition to witnessing the fall of a heavenly venerable, they would also be fortunate enough to witness the birth of an ancient legend. With the arrival of the three heavenly venerables, Yuhuan, Mirofa, and Xianzhen, a gap was torn in the cloud vortex that covered the sky. The three heavenly venerables were like three sharp arrows with tricolored divine flames on them as they shot straight at the enemy in the depths of the vortex. For a moment, the golden myriad spirit Ancient E, the purple sky incinerating purple flame, and the grayish-green netherworld ghost flame all bloomed with their own unique brilliance. The three flames intertwined and rose, burning fiercely, almost instantly burning away a large portion of the cloud vortex. At the same time, it also cleared the vision of the spectators. And it was precisely because of this clear vision that everyone witnessed what happened next with their own eyes. After the green sword light and the tricolored divine flame collided in the air, it was like a sharp sword piercing through a glass window. It strangely felt like a mirror shattering in the void. Boom. Following a huge explosion, a formless shockwave spread out. Wherever the shockwave went, spiritual energy surged and wreaked havoc. The spectators closer to the center of the battlefield felt as if their chests had been hit by a battering ram. They were actually sent flying by this invisible force just like that. All of you back off. Back off at least 5 kilometers. Divine generals of 5 directions, listen up. No one is allowed to come near this place. Fortunately, there were not only 3 heavenly venerables present today. The 7 heavenly venerables, including Yu Jiang, Taihua, and Yinghua who had arrived later, saw the intensity of the battle and simultaneously pulled up a protective barrier around the periphery, saving many people in time. Although it was only the first move, the intensity of this battle was far greater than the battle on Dragon Head Peak. Feeling the powerful true essence fluctuations, the 7 celestial venerables' faces suddenly flashed with a trace of surprise. It was no wonder that Yuhuan would put on such a solemn expression. If it was a one-on-one battle, it was likely that none of the 10 Empyreans present were his match. In a battle between experts, one move was enough to determine the truth. The 7 celestial venerables merely watched the battle from afar and did not personally step forward to fight with Chen Shi, so their feelings were naturally not as vivid as those of the 3 celestial venerables present. Chen Shi's seemingly casual slash. Other than forcing the heaven, earth, and man lanterns to retreat, he had also directly injured the 3 celestial venerables who were related to the lives of the 3 lanterns. How could Yuhuan Tianzuan not be shocked? It wasn't like he hadn't fought with Chen Shi before. When he fought Chen Shi, who was at the peak of the soul formation stage, he didn't have the upper hand, but it wasn't as if he had no chance of winning. But now, Chen Shi was fighting against 3 celestial venerables alone, but he could still easily injure them. How was this possible? At this moment, not only was Yuhuan Tianzuan shocked, but even the 2 celestial venerables, Miao Fa and Xianzhen, were filled with shock and uncertainty. The 3 of them hesitated, and the scene temporarily returned to its original calm. Seeing this, Chen Shi wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he slowly flew up until he was at the same height as the 3 celestial venerables. Only then did he speak loudly to everyone present. This humble one is Chen Shi. I've already met all of you before, so I don't think I need to introduce myself too much, right? Actually, I've always wanted to sit down and talk with all of you, but you didn't even give me a chance to speak. I originally had no intention of making an enemy out of Tiandu. I just wanted to borrow the sky-bearing impersonation technique and use the floating dawn mirror. If all of you are reasonable, you should understand that you shouldn't make an enemy out of me for no reason. At this point, Chen Shi suddenly paused. Then he looked at Yuhuan Tianzuan and said calmly, "Also, I want to clarify that I didn't kill Wuxia." After hearing this, a trace of doubt flashed across Yuhuan Tianzuan's face. He frowned and seemed to want to say something, but then he heard Chen Shi continue. "So what I want to say now is, if all of you are willing to talk, then I can give all of you another chance. Let's turn weapons of war into gifts of jade and silk so as to avoid increasing the sin of killing. If not, everyone please don't blame my sword for being merciless." Although Chen Shi wasn't an unforgiving evil person, he wasn't a good person with a gentle temperament either. If the mysterious woman hadn't saved him, he would have died with hatred in his heart. Therefore, although his words seemed reasonable in reality, he didn't leave any face for the 10 celestial venerables. This was deliberately embarrassing for Qiandu. Of course, if the other party honestly lowered their heads and admitted their mistakes, Qinshi could indeed consider letting them live. But, with the lofty status of the 10 celestial venerables, how could they easily lower their heads to others? What? Don't we, the 10 celestial venerables, need face? If they really agreed to Qinshi's request today, then how would the 10 of them face the generals of Tiandu in the future? How would they continue to rule the outside world with the face? From the beginning, Qinshi had already calculated the thoughts of the 10 celestial venerables. The reason why he wasted his breath was actually just to give himself a good reason to make a move so that he could be more decisive when he took action later. Speaking of which, Qinshi was really a little mischievous, as expected. It would have been better if he hadn't said those words. After saying that, the 10 celestial venerables' expressions changed greatly. Among them, Celestial Venerable Sun Blaze, who had the most fiery temper, was so angry that he directly summoned his natal magic treasure, Heaven-Splitting Axe. After that, Celestial Venerable Sun Blaze ignored Celestial Venerable Yuzhang's obstruction and rushed toward Qinshi with his giant axe. Little thief, don't be so arrogant. Yu Huan, you guys watch on the sidelines for now. Let me deal with him alone. Yu Huan, Mirofa, and Xianzhen couldn't gain any advantage over Qinshi, but Celestial Venerable Sun Blaze didn't believe it. He raised his giant axe and fiercely chopped at Qinshi. Axes were different from swords. They were designed to be heavy and powerful and must kill in one hit. Therefore, as Celestial Venerable Sun Blaze chopped down with his axe, a strong wind immediately blew in the air. In terms of power, it was even more ferocious than the 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man. This kind of fighting style that only focused on killing and disregarded defense was actually very rare among immortal cultivators. Celestial Venerable Sun Blaze relied on the indomitable fierceness in his bones to fight for the position of Celestial Venerable. Therefore, even if his cultivation wasn't at the top of the 10 Celestial Venerables, not many people dared to casually fight with him. He was a living brute. But today this brute met an opponent who was even more reckless than him. Come on! Seeing that the giant axe was about to arrive, Qinshi's face suddenly flashed with a trace of excitement. He made a grabbing motion with his left hand, and a saber-like materialization weapon condensed in his hand. Then Qinshi held the saber in his hand and directly faced the giant axe. Using strength to overcome strength. Using force to meet force. He wanted to take this opportunity to gauge the absolute power that he now possessed. Chapter 438. Just as Celestial Master Blazing Sun was wielding his heaven-splitting axe and using all his strength to execute the 36 moves of the Heavenly Dipper Axe technique, Qinshi's mood could be accurately described with one idiom, and that was, elation at the sight of a prey. Different cultivation methods would naturally lead to different combat habits for immortal cultivators. Based on Qinshi's previous combat style, when faced with such a ferocious cultivation technique, Qinshi would definitely not meet it head-on. Instead, he would constantly twist and turn and restrain his opponent until he found a flaw in his opponent's aura. Only then would he decisively strike with his sword, hoping to achieve the desired result in one strike. The axe technique was ferocious, while the sword technique was nimble. Each of the 18 types of martial arts had their own unique characteristics. It was not easy to judge which one was better and which one was worse. It was also because of the characteristics of the axe technique that Celestial Master Blazing Sun's move was not necessarily exquisite. However, it was definitely incomparably violent. Even if Yu Huan and the others joined forces, they did not dare to meet it head-on. Of course, just because Yu Huan and the others did not dare to meet it head-on did not mean that Qinshi did not dare to meet it head-on. This was his first battle after stepping into the insightful emptiness realm, so he naturally treated this battle as a testing ground for his sword. Therefore, Qinshi abandoned the sword technique he was most proficient in and instead used the Red Sun Saber technique, which he had not used often before. He was prepared to meet Celestial Master Blazing Sun's axe head-on, hoping to see how much progress he had made. Therefore, the moment he raised his hand and swung his saber, Saber Chi was born, instantly cutting through the void and soaring into the sky. At the same time, the area within a radius of several hundred feet was shrouded in Saber Chi, as if it wanted to destroy everything within range. It was impossible to dodge and was at the mercy of others. And this was the third move of the Red Sun Saber technique. One saber cleaves the sky, one with the saber. Great clumsiness turned into simplicity, one saber was enough. As the heaven-splitting axe came crashing down, a bright saber light with a hint of coldness shot out from the tip of the saber. Then, with an incomparably violent and domineering aura, it slashed directly at the incoming celestial master Blazing Sunday. At this moment, almost all the spectators, including the 10 celestial masters, could not help but hold their breaths, for fear of missing any exciting scenes. However, what happened next disappointed them. For some unknown reason, the moment the tip of the saber touched the edge of the axe, the giant axe formed from celestial venerate sun blazes true yuan qi melted like snow under the blazing sun and slowly dissipated into the void. This feeling was very strange. It was as if one side was holding a tempered steel knife, while the other side was holding an axe carved out of ice. Therefore, as soon as the two came into contact, the axe shattered into countless ice shards. Sigh. Seeing this, Qin sighed silently. In the end, he still couldn't hold it in. After all, how could he, who had already grasped the laws of heaven and earth, be like before, only rely on the enormous amount of true essence to fight? If that was the case, wouldn't a Dongshu stage Xiaxianist become a brute with nothing but brute strength? In fact, the moment Heavenly Venerate Sunblaze swung his axe, Qin saw numerous law threads on his body. Therefore, he only needed to cut off one of them to easily neutralize Heavenly Sovereign Sunblaze's attack. Until this moment, Qin finally understood the gap between the Divine Transformation stage and the Dongshu stage. True Yuan was no longer the only standard to measure one's strength. Understanding and grasping the laws of heaven and earth was the direction he needed to study in the future. The more laws he grasped, the closer he was to the great Tao. So, unknowingly he had already reached this step. Thinking of this, Qin excitement from his breakthrough immediately calmed down. When he turned his head to look at Yuhuan Tianzuan and the others again, there was only a pale feeling left in his heart. That was dull and uninteresting. So what if they were Tiandu? So what if they had more people? They were no longer on the same level. The reason was simple. It was like an adult fighting kindergarten children. Even if there were 100 children standing opposite him, he wouldn't feel any pleasure after destroying them. Punch at the Nanshan nursing home, kick at the Beihai kindergarten. This was just a joke. Perhaps this was the after effect of advancing to the next level. At this moment, in Qin eyes, this great world that carried all the hopes of the ancient cultivators was no different from the Beihai kindergarten. He silently looked around the room. Wherever he looked, the other party would reveal a nervous and somewhat flustered expression. It was just a casual slash. Heavenly Sovereign Sunblaze, who was known for his martial prowess in the divine capital, was seriously injured. Now, he had been brought back to the Dragon Head Peak by the divine generals to heal. Seeing this, the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns immediately took out their life magic treasures as if they were facing a great enemy. They were prepared for any possible attacks from Qin. For a moment, there was a strange silence. When Qin saw their laughable expressions, he couldn't help but think of the mysterious woman in the dark space. Perhaps in the eyes of that mysterious woman, he should be as insignificant and laughable as these people in front of him, right? The great Tao was endless. There was always a mountain higher than another. If he didn't jump into this small pond, he would never know how high the sky was and how wide the earth was. Thinking of the realm that the mysterious woman might reach, even Qin couldn't help but yearn for it. However, yearning was yearning, reality was reality. The reality was, Ying was still waiting for him to save her. Nianyan was still waiting for him to go home. What were they waiting for? Therefore, after seeing the remaining 9 heavenly sovereigns take out their life magic treasures, Qin couldn't help but smile at them and say, "All of you come together, I'm in a hurry." As soon as his voice fell, a divine sword appeared in his right hand. Then, Qin held a sword in one hand and a saber in the other and took the initiative to rush toward the 10 heavenly sovereigns in front of him. Don't be afraid. Everyone attack together. This old man really doesn't believe that he can overturn the heavens. Yuhuan Tianzuan was also a ruthless person. Although he didn't understand why Qin was able to defeat Heavenly Sovereign Yang Yan in one move, he didn't have any intention of retreating. Instead, when he saw Qin make a move, he took the lead to face him. It was still the same 3 lanterns of heaven, earth, and man combined attack. But this time they were not facing Qin, who was at the peak of the semi-god realm. It was Qin, who was at the early stage of the void transformation realm and already had killing intent in his heart. I've already given you a chance. It's you who didn't cherish it, then don't blame me for being ruthless. After saying that, Qin couldn't help but let out a long roar towards the sky, and the sword in his hand suddenly glowed with a faint cold light. The third move of the combination of sword and saber. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and the vast expanse of heaven and earth could be shattered. Chapter 439. 3 styles of saber, 3 styles of sword. 3 styles of saber and sword. 3 styles of endless, 9 styles of returning to one. As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Shi held the sword in his right hand and the saber in his left. With a shocking momentum, he charged toward the 10 celestial sages not far away. At this moment, one of the 10 celestial sages was injured. Although the remaining 9 were a little worried about the strength that Qin Shi had shown before, after being provoked by Qin Shi again and again, the 9 celestial sages were obviously completely provoked. Evil thief, don't be so arrogant. This is the hinterland of Tiandu, under the shadow of the divine ancestor. How can you be so presumptuous? Everyone, let's take him down together. By Su Qingtian's order. As Yuhuan Tianzuan's words fell, the 9 of them no longer cared about their identity and almost simultaneously took out their famous natal magic treasures. As various magic treasures flew out of their hands, the field suddenly shone brilliantly, showing the mighty divine power. Seeing that the battle was about to start, even the 5 divine generals, whose strength was second only to the celestial sages, retreated 10 miles away at this moment, not daring to take half a step forward. After all, this was a battle of the celestial sages. It was also the first time that the 10 celestial sages had joined forces to deal with one person. Therefore, no matter the result, today's battle was enough to be called unprecedentedly brilliant. Perhaps it was to make this battle more legendary. The moment Qin Shi raised the saber and sword in his hand, even time seemed to stop flowing, and everything in the void was silent. The third style of the divine skill, combination of saber and sword. The saber is formless, the sword is formless, the vast expanse shatters heaven and earth. When he was still in the heavenly jade world, Qin Shi had already used this move. However, at that time he had not comprehended the true meaning of the word void, so he could only force the move with a huge amount of vital essence. At this moment, Qin Shi finally stepped into the insightful void realm. Therefore, when he used this move again, he suddenly had a different feeling in his heart. It turned out that this move actually involved the application of the laws of heaven and earth, and could only be smoothly used by those above the insightful void realm. The saber is formless, the sword is formless. Its purpose was to shatter heaven and earth. Qin Shi swung the sword and saber in his hand, and endless saber and sword chi burst out in the void. Aura fluctuations could not be concealed, so the celestial venerables immediately felt that there seemed to be thousands of swords slowly forming in front of him. However, when they focused their gazes, they did not find anything strange. That was because this move had chi but was formless. It was exactly the same as that sentence. The blade was formless and the sword was formless. The chi of the saber and sword, which contained the essence of the word void, was like a huge net in the void, suddenly covering the 9 celestial venerables. The 9 celestial venerables did not notice anything strange. Only when the net of chi from the saber and sword came crashing down did everyone realize that they had fallen into Qin Shi's trap. There was almost no warning. It was as if they had stepped into a void, and there was no end to their surroundings. Yuhuan Tianzuan tried to struggle but found that he couldn't. It was as if he was trapped by something invisible. This? Seeing this, Yuhuan Tianzuan couldn't help but widen his eyes slightly. He quickly mobilized all the true chi in his body, trying to forcibly break free from the shackles. However, at this moment, his body suddenly felt pain, and countless bloody marks suddenly burst out all over his body. As if falling into a red dye vat, the 9 celestial venerables' clothes were instantly soaked with blood. Even with the protection of treasures, it was difficult for them to withstand the power of this move. Because this move was simply unpredictable and impossible to dodge. It was hidden in the void. If one did not comprehend the essence of the word void, it was basically impossible to detect it. And this was the terrifying part of the third divine skill. Turning nothingness into something, the world was filled with saber and sword chi, formless and formless. At this moment it was a flower. At that moment it was a bird. At the next moment, it was a scorching sun in the sky. From the perspective of a bystander, it was as if nothing had happened. However, the 9 celestial venerables' bodies were oozing blood very strangely. Just as everyone was feeling a little puzzled, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly looked up to the sky and let out a fierce howl. Then, he gritted his teeth and ignited a drop of blood essence in his body. One had to admit that this old man did have some eyesight. Once he saw that the situation was not right, he actually directly put on a desperate posture. At the price of burning his blood essence, he forcefully tore a gap in Qin Shi's saber and sword chi net. After escaping, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not waste any time. He directly recalled the Jade World glazed cup and then used the ancient spirit Yi to save the few celestial venerables beside him. Yuhuan Yu. Looking at Yuhuan Tianzuan, who was covered in blood chi, a trace of shock appeared on Heavenly Venerate Wondrous Spell's face. Hearing that, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not immediately reply. Instead, he looked at Qin Shi with eyes full of resentment. This person is not the same as before. He must have had some fortuitous encounter and stepped into the legendary supreme stage. This sentence was like a bucket of cold water poured over their heads, instantly extinguishing the burning battle intent in their hearts. Supreme stage. That was an existence that surpassed Empyreans. Ever since the Grand Pure Saint ancestor passed away, the strength of the great world had begun to decline. It had been a long time since a supreme stage existence had appeared. Thinking of this, everyone couldn't help but look at each other. However, Yuhuan Tianzuan did not give them too much time to think. Instead, he continued, "This person is not from our Tiandu. He is an external enemy. If we avoid him, how will we have the face to worship the sacred ancestor in the future? Tiandu's 10,000 years of inheritance, the sacred ancestor's illustrious name, is it going to be destroyed in our hands today? This old man is unwilling and also unwilling. Only because I am one of the 10 Empyreans of Tiandu." These words were so beautiful that it was as if the 8 Empyreans present had been injected with chicken blood. Their faces immediately surged with boundless pride. That's right. So what if you're a sovereign? Since we are the 10 Empyreans of Tiandu, how can we easily lower our heads to others? This seemingly long and tedious conversation actually happened in the blink of an eye. Therefore, just as Qin Shi was about to deliver the final blow, the remaining 8 Empyreans actually ignited the blood essence in their bodies. In an instant, the true essence fluctuations caused by the 9 Empyreans burning their blood essence were like the setting sun dyeing a large area of the sky red. Seeing this, Qin Shi couldn't help but flash a trace of admiration on his face. Immortal cultivators couldn't lose their courage. He didn't expect that the 10 Empyreans had been in high positions for so many years, but the sword in their hearts hadn't rusted because of this. His opponent was so valiant, how could he fall behind? Therefore this time, Qin Shi didn't think of avoiding the spearhead at all. Instead, he immediately brandished his sword to meet it. At this point, the result of this battle was destined to be a fight to the death. Then the 10 Empyreans united and displayed all that they had learned in their lives. They charged towards the legendary supreme stage in their strongest state. And Qin Shi displayed the elegance of the void stage. With his own strength, he fought 9 soul formation stage cultivators who were burning their blood essence and risking their lives. This battle was unprecedentedly bright. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website. As the Jade Universe glazed cup flew out of his hand, the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying Formation, which had been greatly weakened due to Celestial Venerable Sunblaze's absence, immediately fell apart. At this time, Qin Shi seemed to have expected this. He suddenly forced Wondrous Spell Heavenly Lord back with a slash of his saber. Then he decisively pulled back his sword, allowing the sword that had been accumulating power for a long time to point directly at Yuhuan Tianzuan. Yuhuan Tianzuan only saw a cold light flash before his eyes. He didn't even have time to defend himself before the sword pierced through his protective aura and through his body, drawing a long line of blood in the air. Pooh! After suffering such a heavy blow, Yuhuan Tianzuan lost his ability to fight on the spot and instantly fell from the sky. If Heavenly Lord Yinghua hadn't reacted quickly and caught him in time, Yuhuan Tianzuan would have fallen directly into the endless void below. The formation has been broken. We are in danger. Everyone, quickly retreat to the Imperial Hall and regroup. We will wait for an opportunity. Go quickly. I will stop him. Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell was indeed somewhat courageous. Seeing that the 10 Directions Immortal Slaying Formation had collapsed due to Yuhuan Tianzuan's injuries, he advanced instead of retreating. He held the 8 Views Palace Lantern and brazenly faced Qin Shi. However, Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was only at the early stage of soul formation, couldn't block Qin Shi, who was at the early stage of void transformation, even if he burned his blood essence. Thus, in the instant that the other 7 people turned around and flew away with Yuhuan Tianzuan, Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, who was covering for them, was struck by Chen Shi's sword. As a result, he fell from the sky and heavily smashed into the floating island below. A 1,000-mile journey collapsed because of an ant's nest. Because of Yuhuan Tianzuan's momentary mistake, the 10 Directions Celestial Lords were instantly defeated. In gaming terms, that would be, the configuration of their formation was too low and the margin for error was almost zero. A single mistake would instantly cause them to be wiped out. After Chen Shi defeated Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell, he didn't rush to finish him off. Instead, he immediately chased after the 8 fleeing Celestial Lords. Seeing this, Heavenly Lord Jianghu, who was the strongest among them, decisively stepped forward and replaced Heavenly Lord Wondrous Spell to cover for everyone. However, Chen Shi was like a madman who had gone berserk. As soon as the two of them met, Heavenly Lord Jianghu was slashed down by his sword and fell straight into the void below. Wondrous Spell and Jianghu fell one after another. Even if they excluded the heavily injured Yuhuan, there were still 6 people left. Thus, Heavenly Lord Xuanzhen stepped forward. They couldn't delay for too long, but this method of covering the rear greatly lengthened the battle line. As a result, after Chen Shi repelled Xuanzhen with his sword, Dragon Head Peak appeared not far in front of them. At this moment, Chen Shi didn't need to think with his but to know. They were going to activate the Great Sun Moonstar Formation. Since this formation was the final killing move that the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor had left behind for Tian Capital, it must have its unique features. Chen Shi didn't think that he was a match for the Grand Pure Divine Ancestor, so he deliberately lured everyone to the periphery of the floating islands. His goal was to make the 10 Heavenly Venerables stay away from the Imperial Polarity Hall and prevent them from activating the formation at any time. Chen Shi had achieved his goal. However, he still didn't expect. The 10 Heavenly Venerables, who held high positions, would have the courage to burn their blood essence and sacrifice themselves at the same time. Xuanzhen fell. Yinghua stepped forward again. The Heavenly Venerables, who used to be high and mighty, fell one after another, but the remaining few stood up resolutely and continued to cover the rear for their companions. Although they couldn't block 1 or 2 moves from Chen Shi, they could create some obstacles for Chen Shi and buy some time for everyone to escape. When only 3 Heavenly Venerables were left beside Yuhuan, the group of 4 finally flew to Dragon Head Peak. For Tian Capital, for the Divine Ancestor's reputation. Go Yuhuan. We'll do our best to buy time for you. A fierce look flashed across the Taihua Heavenly Venerable's face. Then he and the other 2 Heavenly Venerables turned to face Chen Shi, who was chasing after them with a sword. Seeing this, Chen Shi couldn't help but yell fiercely, "Get lost!" The battle was coming to an end. As long as the 3 people in front of him were defeated, Tian Capital would have no chance of counterattacking. Therefore, Chen Shi no longer held back and decisively used his killing move. The saber was formless, the sword was formless, and the vast expanse could shatter the universe. The sound came with the sword, its momentum unparalleled. The 3 Heavenly Venerables with the lowest cultivation didn't even have time to scream before they were completely pulverized by the billions of saber lights and sword shadows. However, it was also because they risked their lives to stop Yuhuan Tianzuan successfully flew to the front of the Imperial Polarity Hall. As soon as he landed, Yuhuan Tianzuan suddenly let out a long howl and slammed his palm into the center of the square. In an instant, the entire floating island trembled violently. Feeling the tremors from Dragon Head Peak, Yuhuan Tianzuan couldn't help but tremble with excitement. After tens of thousands of years of silence, the array pattern that the Divine Ancestor personally engraved on the square finally showed its brilliance to the world. Divine Ancestor above. The Emperor's majestic North Tower, the Divine Ancestor's vast kindness shakes the southern sky. Fortunately, we did not disappoint you. Chapter 444. Qin Shi hadn't considered the issue of Tiandu's aftermath for too long. After all, he hadn't even settled his own family's affairs, so where would he find the time to care about other people's affairs? He had to find a way to retrieve Yingying's soul. That was what Qin Shi needed to do right now. Thus, Qin Shi began a careful search of the ruins of Saturn's ring. Saturn's volume was 830 times that of Earth, and its rings were formed after comets and asteroids collided. Its width alone was 25 times that of Earth's diameter. Thus, when the 120,000 floating islands were thrown into Saturn's rings, it was like sand falling into the sea, not causing any waves at all. Perhaps because the formation had just been activated, the strange energy fluctuations on the soul mirror had completely disappeared. Qin Shi searched the floating island ruins for a long time, almost inch by inch, before finally finding that damnable mirror in one of the meteorite ruins. The sky-bearing mirror of floating dawn. The soul mirror was buried deep in the soil, so it was inevitable that it was stained with some dust and dirt. Qin Shi summoned it back with his inner energy, and a bone-chilling sensation came as soon as he touched it. In all honesty, the soul mirror really did appear to be a little mundane now that it had lost that unknown energy fluctuation. A dull mirror with a dark yellow frame. If it weren't for the exquisite patterns on the frame, and the mysterious power of the law faintly contained within, Qin Shi wouldn't have believed that this mirror was actually a legendary artifact. Khanate peerless treasure. Perhaps this was what they meant by returning to one's natural state. The soul mirror wasn't an offensive treasure, so for Tiandu, its symbolic significance was far greater than its actual significance. When the Sun-Moon-Star formation was activated, Qin Shi didn't sense any spiritual fluctuations, so he deduced that the formation had nothing to do with the soul bridge. Whether it was the formation or the soul bridge. Both were meant to travel to Earth, but the methods used were completely different. The Sun-Moon-Star formation was too barbaric and crude, and Xiannu's soul wasn't enough to activate it. Its true source of power was actually all the dragon veins in the great world. That was why when it was activated, it would set off a tidal wave of spiritual qi that was close to landslides and tsunamis. Qin Shi tried to infuse his true essence into the soul mirror, but there was no reaction. Thus, after a moment of hesitation, he separated a strand of his spirit from his heart aperture and carefully poured it into the soul mirror. Qin Shi was already cautious enough. After all, this was a Khanate cardinal treasure that he had never come into contact with before. The boat of friendship really capsized so easily. Changhua seemed to have expected this. Seeing that his companion was attacking him, he did not panic at all. He directly used the oar as a weapon and fought back. The two of them were about the same age, so their cultivation was naturally similar. Therefore, while Changhua was dealing with his companion's attack, he still had time to laugh and said, "Fei, didn't you always say that the universe is so big that although you can't see it all in your life, you have to set foot in 2 or 3 places? The Tianshu ruins are right in front of you. Don't you want to go in and have a look?" Hearing this, the teenager called Fei's face turned cold. He said hatefully, "The Tianshu ruins is known as an ancient forbidden area. Anyone who trespasses will die. Do you really think that these legends are only used to fool 3-year-old children?" "Ah, are you afraid?" "Of course I'm not afraid of you." The teenager was arrogant to begin with. How could he endure such ridicule from his companion? Therefore Fei no longer showed mercy. He directly drew his long sword and fought with Changhua. The two of them fought back and forth, but they did not notice at all. The wooden boat had already gone deep into the Haute Nebula. When the wooden boat rushed out of the Haute Nebula, the two of them suddenly felt that their eyes were wide open, so they could not help but stop what they were doing. "This is the Tianshu ruins? We're actually here?" The two teenagers stared blankly at the solar system in front of them. Even the daring Changhua was shocked at this moment. The reason why Changhua dared to drive the wooden boat close to the Haute Nebula was because he knew the power of this cloud-piercing shuttle. One had to know that this cloud-piercing shuttle was his father's most important treasure. It was personally made by a supreme being, and its speed was extremely fast. When the host was in danger, The cloud-piercing shuttle could even instantly turn into a defensive treasure to protect the host. This was also the reason why Jianghu dared to go close to the Haute Nebula. He just wanted to scare Yi Fei. Who would have thought that the two of them would actually break into the legendary Forbidden Area without any hindrance? The Tianshu ruins? Thus, in the huge courtyard, there was only a fish that could only roll its eyes all day long. She pushed open the door. Qin Ruoying's figure came into view. A year was enough time for the brand new quilt to be dyed a little dark yellow. However, it did not leave any trace on Qin Ruoying's face. She lay quietly on the bed as if she was asleep. She came to the bedside. After smoothing out her hair that was messed up by Yin, he gently held his lover's hand. Ying, I'm back. I'm sorry, I've kept you waiting. As she spoke, she took out that damned broken mirror from her bosom. This was the first time he looked at a magic treasure so carefully. It was as if he was not looking at himself in the mirror but Qin Ruoying in the mirror. This was a Khanate treasure. Not only did it involve the soul of Shen, but it also involved the great formation of sun and moon and stars. Thus, she did not dare to activate it lightly. He had found the soul mirror. Ying had not woken up yet. So what was he waiting for? She hesitated for a long time. Then, as if he had finally come to a decision, he gently kissed his lover's forehead. Then he silently sat cross-legged next to Qin Ruoying. He prepared to let his soul enter the soul mirror again. Then, like last time, he would imbue the soul mirror with vital essence in order to activate it. This time, whether it was the explosion of the sky or the 9-star alignment, he must bring Ying's soul out. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor Mobile Version Website. At this time, the little fellow didn't forget to add, "Dad, you play by yourself. Mom said you're not allowed to enter the room. I'll sleep with Mom today." She had no choice but to turn around and walk into the guest room that Xiao Yuan stayed in before. As early as when she left, Xiao Yuan had already successfully entered a multinational company as an intern under Gu Lao's introduction, so the tea house was completely closed. She lay on the bed, thinking about how to reopen the tea house tomorrow while listening to the movements in the room next door. Although Qin Ruoying lost her memory, she still had a kind of heartfelt care for Yin. This also made she feel very gratified. Ying was still the same Ying. Although incomplete, she was still the Ying that he couldn't help but be fascinated by. Qin Ruoying seemed to have forgotten how to cultivate, so when the little fellow fell asleep, she silently lay on the side. She was on this side of the wall, she was on the other side of the wall. Please remember the domain name of this book. 9 Heavens God Emperor Mobile Version Reading Website.